Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. If you're searching for an incredible novel, check out my Patreon page. Your support will help transform this story into an exciting audiobook. Join me on this adventure. By becoming a Patreon member, you'll be helping me keep creating and bringing this content to life. Thank you for being part of the journey.
Chapter 121. Chapter 121. August Poll. New fanfics are out. Remember to vote on Patreon. The vote is free. Reviews are also counted. Naruto. Infinite New World. Slashing through worlds. Starting from the Soul Society. One Piece. My Piltover technology is far ahead. Equals. Hearing others talk about it is nothing compared to witnessing it firsthand. So, this is the power of one of the only two Omega mutants? Is an Omega mutant really this powerful? The absurd news about the white-clad man altering reality was something they knew. Initially, they didn't believe it, but seeing Messiah's overwhelming power made them start to believe. Hearing the whispers, Syd glanced at the prisoners but didn't pay them much attention. He was busy eliminating the remaining personnel and searching for the base's leaders. To his surprise, he couldn't find any trace of them after searching for a while. Syd grabbed a fleeing person and asked, "Where are the leaders?" The terrified man stammered, "You mean Base Commander Alexandros or Dr. Bolivar? Where are they?" Syd frowned. The next second, he received an answer that deepened his frown. They left the base as soon as the white-clad man made the Sentinels disappear. "I don't know where they went." Syd casually disposed of the man, muttering, "They were prepared and fled so quickly? So cautious." He felt the situation was becoming troublesome. Eliminating only the subordinates of Alexandros was pointless if the base commander and Dr. Bolivar, the mind behind the Sentinels' development, weren't dealt with. Through the surveillance cameras, Alexandros and Bolivar watched the fire engulfing the base, which was nearly in ruins, with a sense of terror. This Messiah. At this moment, Alexandros felt a surge of relief. Fortunately, Dr. Bolivar had the foresight to arrange an early evacuation plan. Otherwise, as they felt fearful, Syd suddenly sensed the surveillance from satellites. Moments later, Venom's urgent voice came from his right hand. "Syd, danger. In the sky." Syd frowned, ignoring the panicked people around him. He flew higher, scanning the sky. Soon, with his keen eyesight, he noticed several white dots approaching. With his exceptional vision, Syd saw that they were 8 white-shelled missiles. Floating flight +1. Without thinking much, he moved to evade. However, to his surprise, the 8 missiles were incredibly fast and locked onto him, adjusting their direction no matter where he flew. Boom, boom, boom. Deafening explosions erupted. Raging flames, shrapnel, and shockwaves instantly engulfed the entire base, heading straight for Syd. Without much time to think, he quickly used his deflection shield in front of him. Deflection shield +1. Deflection shield +1. Deflection shield +1. 3 deflection shields wrapped around him. As the fire and shockwaves engulfed him, Syd also used chaos magic for extra protection. A layer of red energy shielded him completely. Even Venom was ready to cover him fully at any moment. Boom boom. The terrifying explosions continued, covering at least 100 to 200 meters, creating a mushroom cloud-like explosion on the ground. Base 23 was almost instantly obliterated, leveled by the fiery shockwaves. The intense heat and waves scorched the area, far more terrifying than any summer sun. In mere moments, countless lives in the base were lost. As Syd resisted the missile bombardment, the military base that had launched the attack was filled with tension and anticipation. Recently, because of the white-clad man's Omega mutant ability, several countries, including the United States, had secretly signed an agreement to eliminate Omega mutants. Other countries would provide funding to assist the United States in eliminating Omega mutants, specifically Messiah and the white-clad man. At this moment, they were executing this mission. Watching Messiah being engulfed by the missile shockwaves, Colonel Anton, a blonde, blue-eyed officer in a green uniform, clenched his fist with excitement. "Got him, haha. This Messiah is dead for sure. This is what happens when you oppose us, the United States." Seeing Messiah seemingly defeated, other soldiers also cheered, including a general. Their excitement stemmed from the belief that while Messiah's mutant powers were strong offensively, his defense was likely weak. According to analysts, Messiah's weakness was probably his defense. In the military base, dozens of soldiers and some powerful figures watching through their devices saw the flames and shockwaves gradually subside. As the smoke cleared, what appeared before them was a scene of blackened, charred ruins. Ignoring other areas, They quickly looked towards the spot where Messiah had been hit by the shockwaves. The next second, they were dumbfounded. What they saw was Messiah, seemingly unharmed, with not even his clothes torn. This barrage of missiles hadn't killed him. It hadn't even injured him. Many faces turned pale with shock. Omega mutants are this terrifying? At the explosion site, while Syd might have seemed unscathed, he had just relaxed. Moments ago, 3 deflection shields had been shattered by the shockwaves, and even the chaos magic shield had dissipated. If it hadn't been for Venom enduring the last bit of the impact, he might have been injured. However, even so, Venom was now severely hurt and was recuperating in his right hand. After all, its weakness was fire and sound waves. The next second, Syd moved, flying quickly towards the city. He couldn't guarantee he'd survive another round. Leaving a trail behind, he flew through the air. Sure enough, within a few minutes of flying, he spotted more white missile silhouettes in the distant sky. These missiles are so fast? Syd tried to shake them off, but they were too fast. He had underestimated modern technology. These missiles, though not nuclear, packed a significant punch, traveling at several times the speed of sound. End of chapter. Chapter 122. Chapter 122. Could a normal person dodge this? Syd considered that he was no Flash. With his floating flight ability only at level 4, there was no way he could dodge these damn things. After all, the speed of a level 4 floating flight had not yet reached the speed of sound. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of upgrading his floating flight to level 5. Perhaps, level 5 would be different? Unfortunately, thinking too much now was useless. There was no time to upgrade his floating flight ability. Faced with another wave of 8 white shell missiles, he had to find a solution. Black particles? No, currently, the black particles were only at level 3, with a range of only about 20 meters. They couldn't destroy the missiles from a distance. Still, Syd decided to give it a try. Black particle +1. The next second, black ripples appeared from his hand, shooting towards one of the rapidly approaching white shell missiles. In almost a blink, the two collided. But then, something unexpected happened. As soon as the black particles touched the missile, it seemed to trigger something, and the missile instantly exploded. Boom! The flames and shockwaves spread, and the remaining missiles were also triggered and exploded. Boom! Another violent explosion with a radius of nearly 200 meters occurred. Syd's expression changed slightly, but he had prepared himself mentally. As soon as he shot the black particles, he was ready with the deflection shield. 3 invisible deflection shields stood in front of him. The shockwaves from the explosion were incredibly fast, hitting the deflection shields almost instantly. At the same time, Syd activated his spatial shift. Some names of skills got reworked to fit better. Spatial shift +1. Spatial shift +1. As he resisted the explosion, he kept using spatial shifts, trying to escape the blast radius. However, he underestimated the speed of the expanding explosion. Even after several spatial shifts, he couldn't escape the blast radius immediately. The speed of the flames and shockwaves matched his spatial shift speed. Or rather, although the blast radius was nearly 200 meters, its speed could reach several kilometers per second, hitting him instantly, making it impossible to dodge. Moreover, spatial shifting was limited by the speed of thought. Before each shift, he needed to think about where to move, and even though his thoughts moved faster than ordinary people, it still took time. He could only activate the next shift after reaching the new position, creating inevitable delays. Even if these delays were short, they were still a weakness. Otherwise, teleporters like Nightcrawler and Azazel would have been invincible and not just side characters. Currently, spatial shift was only at level 2, with each shift covering just about 10 meters. Although he hadn't escaped the blast radius immediately, the buffer time created by the continuous shifting and the deflection shields allowed them to last much longer. With the protection of chaos magic, Syd remained unharmed for now. In the military base. Seeing another explosion, the military personnel looked hopeful, with some already imagining the charred remains of Syd hitting the ground and turning into a pile of mush. To their astonishment, they saw a figure emerge from the explosion's remnants. Looking closely, it was Messiah, seemingly unharmed. This is an Omega mutant? In an instant, they were filled with dread. If it were any other superpowered being in the missile's blast center, they'd likely be vaporized. Only this rumored Omega mutant could withstand such an absurdly powerful missile strike unscathed. Because of this, they were even more determined to eliminate this Omega mutant. Such a severe threat had to be dealt with. Almost simultaneously, another wave of missiles appeared. On the scene, Syd hurried towards the city while glaring at the approaching white dots, his face grim. If this continued, He wasn't sure how long he could hold out. His light energy wasn't infinite. He had considered using spatial shifts to reach the city continuously. However, the city was still quite a distance away, and his light energy couldn't sustain thousands of spatial shifts. Moreover, with these missiles traveling at several times the speed of sound, continuous spatial shifts might not even shake them off. Flying rapidly towards the city, Syd mixed in spatial shifts for added speed. Boom, boom, boom. Another round of violent explosions erupted. Soon, more missiles followed. Syd's light energy was depleting rapidly. In the military base. Watching this, the officers' eyes brightened. The first Omega mutant was about to die by their hands. The fourth wave's remnants cleared. The sixth wave. The 10th wave. The 25th wave. In the military base, the officers, who had been hopeful and smug, were now filled with astonishment. Despite 25 consecutive waves of missile bombardment, Messiah was still not dead? Are Omega mutants really this hard to kill? However, there was some relief. After 25 waves of missile bombardment, the satellite images showed that Messiah appeared quite battered, with charred, tattered clothing, seemingly on the verge of collapse. Every officer's eyes shone with excitement. Just a bit more, and Messiah would be dead. The Omega mutant threat would be eliminated. Suddenly, their expressions changed as Messiah neared the city, its outline visible in the distance. "Stop him!" General Luca shouted. The personnel firing the missiles scrambled in panic. On the scene, glancing at the approaching missiles and the city's silhouette in the distance, Syd felt the remaining light energy within him and breathed a sigh of relief. After a series of deflection shields and spatial shifts, only a fifth of his light energy remained. Fortunately, he reached the city before his light energy ran out. Otherwise, as he approached the city rapidly, his mood grew heavy. If the city were 5 kilometers further, he might have been in real danger, potentially bombed to death by the missiles. It seems my strength is still insufficient, and my light energy reserves need to increase. Syd felt the urgency. If he didn't continue to enhance his abilities, the next time, it might be the end of him. This time, it was only because the city was near. Otherwise. End of chapter. Chapter 123. Chapter 123. Boom. 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 Amidst the missile bombardment, Syd soared towards the city at incredible speed. Simultaneously, people in the city heard the distant explosions. After some investigation, they were shocked. Oh my God, are those missiles? Who are the missiles targeting? Is that Messiah? While they were in shock, General Luca and others in the military base were furious. Just a little more, and they would have killed Messiah. If only they had more time. Unfortunately, Messiah got close to the city, preventing them from continuing their assault. At this moment, they were filled with frustration. But no matter how frustrated they were, they had to stop. Bombing Messiah within the city would have too great an impact. Of course, while Messiah escaped this time, he wouldn't be so lucky next time. His death was inevitable. On sight. Landing in the city, Syd looked up at the sky, noticing that no more missiles were coming. His tense nerves slightly relaxed. Ignoring the shocked bystanders, he chose a hidden direction and immediately flew away. Seeing him fly away, the bystanders began to chatter. It really is Messiah. He was attacked by missiles? As they speculated, Syd managed to evade the satellite surveillance and found a secluded spot to rest. As he basked in the sunlight to replenish his depleted light energy, he pondered his next steps. Meanwhile, online discussions about him had erupted. With the appearance of the white-clad man, also known as the white-clad freak, netizens were comparing his identity and strength to Messiah's. A white youth furiously typed his opinion. Who cares about Messiah? The white-clad freak is way stronger. He could kill Messiah with just a word. Immediately, others stepped up to refute him. That's bullshit. Messiah is obviously stronger. That white-clad freak would turn to dust in an instant. Right, Messiah is an Omega-level mutant. There's no way he'd be taken down so easily. Use your tiny brain to think for once. Feeling indignant, Felix sneered and continued typing. So many Sentinel robots, and the white-clad freak made them disappear with a single word. Isn't that terrifying enough? He's like a god. Why wouldn't Messiah be scared? From what we've seen, the white-clad freak easily surpasses Messiah in terms of power and fear factor. Felix's argument had some merit and garnered quite a bit of support. Most people agreed that even among Omega-level mutants, there were differences in strength, and the white-clad freak clearly seemed superior. Felix continued his tirade. In terms of threat level, the white-clad freak also beats Messiah hands down. Didn't you see how much more people fear and dread the white-clad freak? Even the top brass probably fear the white-clad freak more than Messiah. The attention given to the white-clad freak is unmatched by Messiah. With such power, people worldwide probably fear he'd wipe them out with a single word. With his continuous posts, comparing the two Omega-level mutants, the few remaining supporters of Messiah gradually fell silent. Even they had to admit that in terms of displayed power and threat level, the white-clad freak seemed much more terrifying. However, ever since Messiah's first appearance, they had been in awe and fear of him. Even though Messiah was a terrifying mutant, it didn't stop them from admiring his strength and discussing him. Seeing so many people support the white-clad freak now made them feel inexplicably uneasy, as if they were losing. Just as they were feeling frustrated, a man named Igel had a revelation. Quickly, he posted a rebuttal that many people saw. You do have a point, but you're all ignoring something. Seeing this post, Felix and the others felt puzzled. What are we ignoring? Felix sneered, ready to type a rebuttal. Then a new post appeared. Haven't you noticed? When Messiah first appeared, his strength was much weaker compared to now. Back then, he struggled against 10 captors. But now, his power and abilities have grown to a terrifying level. This post left Felix and countless others in shock. Thinking back carefully, they indeed realized that it was true. If Messiah hadn't been hiding his strength. Felix, feeling incredulous, typed, "Are you saying Messiah's power growth is abnormal and he's getting stronger too quickly?" But before they could dwell on this, Igel posted another shocking theory. Compared to the white-clad freak, Messiah's power is not only growing unusually fast, but he also seems to be gaining more mutant abilities over time. You can check some early videos and news about Messiah. This post sent shockwaves through the online community, making everyone, including Felix, feel a chilling sense of disbelief. If this theory were true, then Messiah's potential and terror were far beyond what they initially thought. It could indeed be terrifying. After a moment of shock, Felix quickly retorted, "Come on, this is just your guess. It's not true." His post sparked more responses. "Right, it's just your theory. No mutant is that scary. Don't scare yourself to death. Even if Messiah is an Omega-level mutant, he can't be that terrifying. Science and reason still apply." Few people wanted to believe this theory. As the debate continued, the topic of whether Messiah or the white-clad freak was stronger drew more and more attention. As the only two publicly known Omega-level mutants, they naturally attracted interest, especially with such a contentious topic. Even at Stark Towers, Tony Stark, the X-Men, the Brotherhood of Mutants, and S.H.I.E.L.D. were paying attention to the discussion. End of chapter. Chapter 124. Chapter 124. Stark Tower. "Sir, here's the latest news on Messiah." Jarvis projected the news in front of Tony. Tony, working on his new suit, raised an eyebrow in surprise. Who's stronger? He instantly had a bias in his mind. Although Messiah was an Omega-level mutant, he still believed the white-clad freak's abilities were more potent and terrifying, altering, distorting reality. Whether it was changing matter or making the Sentinel robots disappear, it all showcased the white-clad freak's terrifying power. Even though both were Omega-level mutants, Tony sensed a difference. However, after reading the man Igel's comment, he couldn't help but be amazed. Could it be true? If this guy's theory was right, then Messiah was even more absurd than the white-clad freak. Tony frowned and ordered Jarvis, "Pull up video footage of Messiah from the beginning until now." Quickly, a series of video clips appeared before him, and Tony reviewed them swiftly. After a while, he realized that the theory had some solid evidence. Messiah's power indeed seemed to be growing rapidly. If it was all true, Messiah's terror couldn't even be described in words. Of course, just like others who refuted it, he wanted to believe in science and reason. Tony didn't want to believe this theory either. Could any mutant's potential be that terrifying and unimaginable? Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. The X-Men and mutant students were discussing the topic of Messiah. To them, both Messiah and the white-clad freak were terrifying, objects of their admiration and envy. However, when it came to comparing who was stronger, they, like the ordinary people, felt the white-clad freak's abilities were more extraordinary. Messiah's power and abilities are growing rapidly over time? No way, that can't be true. The mutant students were in disbelief. Even if Messiah was an Omega-level mutant, this was too outrageous. Office. Professor. Scott handed the latest information to Professor Xavier. After reading it, Professor Xavier's face grew solemn. He had thought he was already paying enough attention to Messiah, but it seemed he had underestimated him. If the theory about Messiah's rapid growth in power was true, Then Messiah was unbelievably terrifying. A mutant growing so quickly was something he had never seen. Moreover, he dreaded to think what kind of disaster could occur if Messiah fell into the wrong hands. I hope this theory is incorrect. Professor Xavier sighed. That child's power is already terrifying enough. If it continues to grow, I fear he won't be able to control it. If it goes out of control? Scott tried to comfort him. Professor, don't worry too much. Messiah's power is already terrifying. His growth speed can't be that fast. There can't be a monster with such overwhelming strength and endless growth potential. You can rest assured, Professor. Hearing this, Professor Xavier thought for a moment and realized Scott had a point. He gradually set aside his worries. Shield. Boss, what's wrong? Seeing Director Fury in a frowning and dazed state, Agent Coulson asked with concern. Looking at the latest news on Messiah, Fury furrowed his brows and subconsciously touched the pager to call Captain Marvel. He was hesitating whether to summon Captain Marvel back from another planet. After a moment, he reassured himself that it was just a theory and there was no need to overthink it. The more he thought about it, the more he felt it was unnecessary to call Captain Marvel back to Earth from far away, estimating that she's probably busy saving aliens right now. As far as he knew, the only one currently capable of contending with Messiah and the white-clad freak was his old friend, Captain Marvel. As Syd's topic heated up, host Irina saw an opportunity to gain traction and decided to capitalize on the moment. Moreover, her boss had sent the latest information about Messiah, perfect for a live broadcast. With that in mind, she began preparing immediately. Half an hour later, Irina's announcement of another live broadcast quickly spread across the internet. Irina is live again? Get lost. We don't need your broadcast. Irina, you have no credibility here. Irina was well aware of the ridicule and insults online but was used to it by now. When she teased the audience with news about Messiah, the viewers finally calmed down. At 11 a.m., the live broadcast began on time. Under the spotlight, Irina, dressed in a pink dress with dyed red hair, radiated a vibrant energy. Hello, dear viewers, it's great to see you again. I'm your old friend, Irina. Holding a white microphone, she smiled sweetly. Hearing her opening line, viewers almost lost their composure, ready to mock her. Irina, knowing their sentiments, wasted no time and dropped a bombshell. Today, I bring you the latest update on Messiah, and it's a huge piece of good news. Not long ago, the military reported that they had repelled and defeated Messiah once. Upon hearing this, the viewers, who were just mocking Irina, fell silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. Messiah was repelled and defeated? No way, that's impossible. Irina, you must be lying again. Their first reaction was disbelief. All along, Messiah had given them the impression of being invincible. Especially after the recent city-destroying incident, they couldn't believe anyone could defeat him. Now, Irina was boldly claiming that Messiah was repelled and defeated. How could they believe that? Seeing their reaction, Irina quickly explained, this is true. The military did repel and defeat Messiah. According to the information, the military used several powerful missiles in a long-range attack on Messiah. As she spoke, she gestured towards a man in the distance, saying, I've invited a witness to share the specifics. Please welcome him. Under everyone's watchful eyes, a nondescript white man stepped onto the stage. End of chapter. Chapter 125. Chapter 125. Kareem spoke into the microphone with a solemn tone. At the time, I heard the sound of the missiles exploding and saw Messiah flying over. He looked very battered, like he couldn't hold on. As he spoke, a large screen in the distance played a short clip showing Messiah being bombarded by missiles, forced to flee in a sorry state. Irina smiled sweetly. Did everyone hear our guest's statement and see the footage on the screen? I can assure you all that Messiah was indeed defeated by the military. Listening to her words and watching the footage, the audience finally accepted the truth. Irina continued to smile. What this means, I think everyone understands. Messiah is not invincible. He can be defeated. It may not be long before the military can eliminate this Omega-level mutant. Her words brightened the eyes of the audience, filling them with excitement. Discussions erupted. So Omega-level mutants can be defeated? The military is amazing. I can't wait to see the day Messiah is taken down. If this is true, then Messiah isn't as hard to deal with as we thought. Haha. Irina continued. I've heard that the military is deploying a series of operations related to Messiah. It shouldn't take too long, so let's stay tuned. Finally, she said, well, that's about it for today's live broadcast. See you next time. I, your host Irina, will continue to bring you the latest updates on Messiah. With that, Irina smiled and waved goodbye to the viewers, ending the broadcast. Although the live broadcast ended, its impact did not disappear. The content quickly spread. In the discussion about who was stronger, Messiah or the white-clad freak, Felix tagged Igel, who had refuted him earlier, feeling quite pleased. Did you see the broadcast? Your Messiah seems to have been defeated. You said Messiah was powerful. How did he end up like this? If the military strikes again, the next news about Messiah might be his demise. Ha ha ha. Ha ha, I told you the white-clad freak was stronger, but you wouldn't believe me, ha ha. Before long, Igel saw Felix's message, and his mood soured. He found it hard to believe that Messiah had been defeated. How was that possible? Not only him, but other supporters of Messiah also felt distressed. Stark Tower. Watching the latest news about Messiah, Stark was taken aback. That kid was defeated. He found it unbelievable. How many missiles did the military use? While Tony was pondering, the X-Men, the Brotherhood of Mutants, and S.H.I.E.L.D. also received the news. Logan and the others were naturally worried, while S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Fury breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that this kid hadn't reached the point where he needed to call in Captain Marvel. The military's firepower was sufficient to deal with him. Fury's single eye revealed a hint of a smile. He wondered when the military would take the next step and whether Messiah would become the first Omega-level mutant to fall. Fury was somewhat looking forward to witnessing that scene. While news about Syd was spreading everywhere and people were discussing it, Syd was hiding in an abandoned factory, basking in the sun while floating in mid-air. Float flight experience +1. Float flight experience +1. Syd's eyes were filled with anticipation. Float flight was about to reach level 5. What kind of speed boost would level 5 bring? Breaking the sound barrier? Besides float flight, other abilities hadn't been upgraded in a long time. He turned his attention to the reflective shield and other abilities. If the reflective shield reached level 4, facing missiles wouldn't be as embarrassing as before. Previously, even 3 reflective shields couldn't withstand the missile blasts. It felt quite weak. Perhaps, if the reflective shield reached level 4, just 1 or 2 shields would suffice against those missile attacks. Additionally, if Black Particle reached level 4, its range would significantly increase. And if the Divine Physique advanced from level 3 to level 4, his defense would receive a substantial boost. There were so many things to upgrade, and Syd felt pressed for time. As he thought, he looked at the unlocking progress and subconsciously added all the energy points he had accumulated from time to time. With the energy points depleted, the unlocking progress blurred momentarily and then changed. Unlocking progress. 44%. Not yet. Seeing the progress, Syd felt slightly disappointed. If he could unlock divine power or Baldur's divine attributes, his strength would significantly improve. Not to mention, just divine power alone, as seen with Thor, would bring noticeable combat enhancements after awakening. Before awakening, Thor was an average warrior wielding a hammer, but after awakening, his combat power visibly increased. A classic moment was when he wielded Stormbreaker, resisting the Infinity Gauntlet's gem rays and seriously injuring Thanos, which seemed absurd. Syd mused expectantly, 45% or maybe 50%? At this point, he wasn't sure whether to upgrade his current abilities first or focus on unlocking new ones. After pondering for a while, he decided to upgrade some existing abilities first and consider new ones later. He focused on the Reflective Shield. Ability: Reflective Shield, 195/1000, Level 3. With a thought, an invisible reflective shield appeared before him. Reflective Shield experience +1. As he practiced repeatedly, the reflective shield's experience continued to increase. Time passed. Soon it was the morning of the 4th day, and a notification sounded in Syd's ears. Ability: Reflective Shield, 0/2000, Level 4. As the reflective shield reached level 4, Syd immediately felt a slight change in his body. His genes became more complex. At the same time, the energy within him also transformed slightly. While basking in the sun to recover his depleted energy, Syd began testing his abilities. An invisible reflective shield instantly appeared before him. This is... Upon testing, Syd was surprised. The level 4 reflective shield formed a U-shape, covering most of his body, and the energy it contained felt significantly stronger. Additionally, he found that he could now summon 4 reflective shields at once. I wonder how it will perform against those missiles again, Syd pondered. It shouldn't be as embarrassing as before, right? End of chapter. Chapter 126. Chapter 126. Imagining the scene of facing missiles again, Syd turned his attention to his other abilities. Ability: Black Particle, 170/1000, Level 3. Black Particle was also at Level 3, and it would take several days to reach level 4. In the past few days, he had noticed an increasing number of military tracking personnel. He wasn't sure what they were planning. He hoped to increase his strength before any major changes occurred. With this in mind, Syd continued to practice his abilities. Black Particle Experience +1. Black Particle Experience +1. At this moment, Venom slowly emerged from his right hand, forming a small head. In a slightly weak voice, Venom asked, "When are we going to deal with those humans who bombed us, Syd?" His tone was filled with intense anger, as if he couldn't wait to rush to those missile-launching soldiers and tear them apart. "Give it some time," Syd replied after a moment's thought. Then he asked, "How are your injuries from the missile attack?" Venom sensed himself for a moment and then sighed. "Syd, staying in your right hand has sped up my recovery. I'm almost fully healed." Syd nodded, feeling a bit relieved. Then, under Venom's confused gaze, he resumed practicing Black Particle. Black Particle Experience +1. While Syd was busy practicing Black Particle, a battle was taking place in a remote corner of another city. Roars of beasts and human screams echoed intermittently in this dark alley. A large yellow tiger stood in the alley, glaring at a group of enemies armed with firearms. Both sides faced off, eyes filled with mutual apprehension. At this moment, a mass of gold-red liquid emerged from the tiger, covering its body like armor. Numerous tiny gold-red tentacles writhed around the armor, making it look both eerie and terrifying. The tiger spoke. "What do you humans want?" Staring at the dozen people in front of him, the tiger was cautious. The leader, a burly middle-aged man named Walton, glanced at the 3 bodies on the ground and sneered. "What do we want?" "Of course, we want to capture you and bring you to the lab. I didn't expect your strength to be this formidable. They got careless and were killed by you." Recalling the earlier scene where tentacles pierced through and killed 3 teammates in an instant, Walton felt a chill. He was also taken aback by this symbiote's strength, which far exceeded his expectations. Thinking about the symbiote's information, he took out a silver ball-shaped device from his waist and pressed a button on it. The next second, a loud, jarring noise emanated from the device. Buzz! In an instant, the noise spread and enveloped Cannonball. Seeing their leader activate the sonic weapon, the others, armed with guns and even rocket launchers, brightened up. They knew why their leader did this. Before coming to capture this creature, they had read a lot of data, including information about its kind. They knew that symbiotes had a weakness against sonic attacks. They were eager to see how the creature would react. They expected the symbiote to jump off the tiger upon hearing the noise. However, to their astonishment, the tiger showed no reaction to the sonic attack and looked at them with puzzlement. "What? You're not affected? How is that possible?" Walton and his team were stunned, unable to believe what they were seeing. Symbiotes were supposed to be vulnerable to sonic weapons. Why wasn't this creature reacting? At this moment, Cannonball realized what they were trying to do and sneered. "Did you think I'd be afraid of this? I'm not like those weaklings. Born from my master's power, I'm naturally superior, and my strength is greater." The tiger's face was full of disdain and pride. "Damn it, it's that Messiah again. Omega-level mutants are this strong?" Walton and his team were furious and horrified. Simply being connected to that guy made this symbiote lose its weakness? Seeing no way to capture the creature by trickery, Walton waved his hand, signaling his team to attack. The next second, bang, 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 boom. Golden bullets shot out continuously, along with several rockets. Cannonball leapt, dodging many bullets. Even when hit, the bullets had no effect, deflected by his armor. The rockets, however, were more troublesome. Boom. The explosion sent flames and shockwaves over Cannonball. Cannonball is the name of the tiger. Weird but not bad. The golden-red armor shattered, and fur and flesh were blown off, blood spilling. But to Walton's and their employer's shock, the golden-red tentacles squirmed, and the injuries healed quickly. This mutated symbiote. Walton and his team were increasingly alarmed. Cannonball wasn't passive either. With incredible speed, he leapt in front of them. Golden-red tentacles, sharp as knives, pierced through them. One team member couldn't dodge and was turned into a dried corpse. As time passed, the sounds of beast roars and human screams echoed in the remote area. In the end, Cannonball's battered figure fled. With rocket launchers and other weapons, Walton and his team managed to drive him away, but their goal of capturing him was unfulfilled. They had underestimated this mutated symbiote and the influence of Messiah. Just being connected to him made this symbiote exceptionally difficult to handle. Injuries healed quickly, and after consuming a body, it could become vigorous again, almost unkillable. Useless. You can't even handle a mere symbiote. If I sent you to deal with Messiah, you'd all die in an instant. A deep, powerful voice came from the intercom. Finally, with a hint of anger, he said, "Bring back the blood and flesh samples on the ground and get back here." End of chapter. Chapter 127. Chapter 127. Despite their reluctance, Walton and the remaining team members couldn't object. They obediently collected the tiger's body tissues from the ground. During this process, they gathered a significant amount of blood and flesh, but they didn't find any symbiote tissues. It was unclear whether the tiger had been cautious and not left any behind. 2 hours later, they arrived at Base 6. The samples from Cannonball's body were immediately handed over to the researchers. Quickly, the laboratory bustled with scientists in white lab coats. As evening approached, a tall black-suited middle-aged man with a thick beard strode into the pristine lab. His gaze settled on an elderly man with a head full of white hair. "Dr. Amudi, how are the studies progressing?" Dr. Amudi, peering into a microscope, responded with a mix of astonishment and excitement. "You wouldn't believe what I've discovered. It's truly remarkable. Observing the tiger's tissues, I found tiny traces of golden blood. This golden blood carries an incredible amount of energy. It seems to be the source of the mutated symbiote's power and uniqueness." Golden blood. The head of Base 6, Phil, looked both surprised and intrigued. In an instant, he made a connection. "Is it the blood of that Messiah?" Phil asked, astonished. Dr. Amudi paused thoughtfully before replying, "I believe so. This golden blood is exceptionally unique. The structure of its cells is not only incredibly stable and complex but also highly corrosive." He continued, almost rambling in his excitement, "Its strength surpasses anything I've seen. It doesn't resemble human blood or even mutant blood. It's like the blood of a god. And this golden blood might have been diluted. I can't even imagine how powerful and miraculous the original blood would be." Phil, the base head, frowned and asked, "Can you extract anything useful from it?" At this point, Dr. Amudi's attractive assistant interjected, "It's difficult. The blood is extremely stable and complex." She paused before making a bold suggestion. "However, we could try separating the golden blood from regular blood and injecting it into animals or humans to observe the effects." Phil's eyes lit up at this idea. "You should try it. Whether it's animals or death row inmates, just let me know." Dr. Amudi and his assistant nodded and began preparing for the separation experiment. Time flew by, and by the following afternoon, Phil was staring in amazement at a glass vial in his hand. Inside the transparent vial was a clear liquid with a tiny golden speck floating within, separated golden blood. Holding the vial carefully, Phil joined Dr. Amudi and others behind a glass wall. Inside the lab, an experiment was underway. A disheveled, white-haired prisoner was strapped to a white examination table, his head and limbs restrained. He struggled and shouted in fear, "What are you going to do to me? Let me go." Phil and the others ignored his pleas. Phil handed the vial to the researcher, who promptly extracted the blood with a syringe and injected it into the prisoner's body, despite his protests. The researcher then left the lab, which was immediately sealed. Dr. Amudi and the others watched expectantly. Suddenly, the prisoner convulsed, his face contorted in pain. "What did you do to me?" he screamed. "It hurts." Blood began oozing from his body. With a final agonized scream, a massive blood mist erupted from him, and he passed out, convulsing until his heart stopped. Phil was stunned. Just a tiny bit of blood, and he couldn't handle it? Despite this initial failure, they pressed on, conducting more experiments. Elderly people, children, pregnant women. Days passed, and after countless attempts, they found no success. "Is Messiah's blood really this terrifying?" Phil murmured. Both he and Dr. Amudi were frustrated but had no solutions. While they conducted these experiments, Syd was listening to the sound of another system prompt in his mind. Ability: Black Particle, 0/2000, Level 4. Finally, Level 4. Syd sighed in relief. Feeling the substantial changes in his internal energy, he began testing his abilities. Black Particle Experience +1. A head-sized black wave emerged from his right hand and shot out. Seeing the increased range, Syd was pleasantly surprised. From an original range of 25 meters, it had increased to over 50 meters. "I wonder about the power," Syd mused. Unfortunately, he had no target to test on, but he felt the power must have significantly increased. Additionally, he noticed a considerable increase in his internal energy. After waiting for a while and fully restoring his internal energy, Syd ran a simple test. He discovered that with his current energy, he could use level 3 abilities around 220 times, but level 4 abilities only about 120 times. Syd frowned. His energy was still too limited. If he faced another barrage of missiles, he wasn't sure he could withstand it. Thinking of energy, he turned his attention to the experience bar for floating flight. End of chapter. Chapter 128. Chapter 128. Syd looked at the levitation flight experience bar. Ability: Levitation Flight, 1988/2000, Level 4. Sounds better than floating. During this time, although he hadn't intentionally upgraded his levitation flight, the experience points had been increasing rapidly due to the nature of the ability, and it was nearly at level 5. I wonder what will happen when levitation flight reaches level 5? With curiosity and anticipation, Syd floated in the air, quietly waiting for the levitation flight experience points to fill up. Levitation flight experience +1. Levitation flight experience +1. Accompanied by the final prompt sound, the data for levitation flight in front of Syd changed, and at the same time, he felt a significant transformation within his body. Ability: Levitation Flight, max/max, Level 5. Level 5 is the limit? Syd frowned slightly and thought, is this the limit, or do I need some specific conditions to continue upgrading? If level 5 was the limit, then it felt a bit weak. Aside from the numerical change, the photon energy within Syd's body also became more concentrated and pure. Meanwhile, the sunlight overhead continuously replenished the emptiness inside him. Judging by the momentum, reaching level 5 in levitation flight significantly increased his photon energy. As for the specifics, he needed to wait until his photon energy was fully restored to be sure. With these thoughts, Syd's eyes showed anticipation as he began testing the speed of level 5 levitation flight. In an empty grove under the sunlight, his floating figure suddenly moved, disappearing from his original spot in the next second. Boom! A massive sonic boom sounded. In the blink of an eye, Syd appeared far from where he started. Have I reached the speed of sound? Listening to the echoing sonic boom, he felt quite pleased. I wonder what multiple of the speed of sound this is. 1 or 2. I also wonder if my current speed can surpass those missiles. Syd pondered, feeling a bit uncertain. However, even if he couldn't surpass those missiles, it would still be much harder for them to catch up with him than before. After testing his speed, Syd began testing his constant flight state. In constant flight state, using levitation flight consumed almost no photon energy, but once he exceeded a certain altitude, the photon energy consumption returned to normal. He wondered how it would be now. With curiosity, Syd moved. Accompanied by a sonic boom, his figure quickly ascended into the sky. 300 meters. 1,000 meters. 5,000 meters. 10,000 meters. When he reached 10,000 meters, Syd finally felt the constant flight state disappear, and the photon energy consumption returned to normal. Although he couldn't maintain the constant state indefinitely, which was slightly disappointing, the improvement from level 4 to level 5 in constant flight state was significant, and he was quite satisfied. After all, he could still consume photon energy to continue flying. It would just require more energy. A layer of golden sunlight shone down. At this moment, Syd stood above the clouds. Below his feet was a layer of milky white clouds, resembling cream or white cotton candy. Stepping on them felt like walking in a heavenly palace, and with the golden sunlight illuminating the clouds, it was a breathtaking sight. Of course, if he ignored the thin, suffocating air and the sub-zero temperatures, it would be even more perfect. Even with a level 3 god's body, Syd still felt a bit uncomfortable. Or rather, if not for the level 3 god's body, he would have frozen to death or suffocated by now. It seems that a level 3 god's body is still a bit low. Syd pondered. At an altitude of 10,000 meters, it was already like this. If he went higher, a level 3 god's body definitely wouldn't hold up. I wonder at what level of the god's body I could survive in outer space? Syd felt unsure. He remembered that Thor had once been exposed to outer space and survived for a while due to his strong Asgardian physique. As for staying there indefinitely, he wasn't sure. For instance, Ebony Maw, one of Thanos' subordinates, could control floating objects elegantly, like an alternative Magneto. However, he ended up freezing to death in outer space after the ship's hull was breached. On the other hand, Thor floated in space for a while and could still open his eyes, showing the strength of Asgardian physiology, especially that of the royal family. The Asgardian royal family's physique differed from that of ordinary Asgardians. If Thor can survive in space, there's no reason I can't. At least, I should be able to after reaching level 5. Syd pondered. For now, it was better to stay on the clouds. Going higher would not only consume photon energy to maintain flight, but also endure increasingly harsh and cold environments, which he didn't want to suffer through. However, although staying on the clouds was slightly uncomfortable, the sunlight was truly abundant. At least, Syd felt that his photon energy was increasing much faster. In the future, if he encountered cloudy or overcast weather, he could directly fly above the clouds to bask in the sun, indirectly reducing his development time. While Syd floated quietly above the clouds, enjoying a 1 to 2 hour sunbath, a commotion suddenly came from the distant clouds. A large white passenger plane suddenly emerged from the clouds. Looking at this slow-moving plane, Syd frowned slightly. At the same time, someone on the plane noticed him. In the endless expanse of white clouds, a black-clad humanoid figure standing on the clouds was impossible to miss. My God! Look outside, there's someone standing there. A white man in his 30s pointed in shock at the distant black figure. His words left the surrounding passengers and passing staff stunned, thinking this person must be crazy. Given the conditions outside, how could anyone be standing there? But when they looked over, they indeed saw a mysterious black-clad humanoid figure standing on the clouds, observing them like he was looking at a new toy. The passengers widened their eyes, covering their mouths in shock. Aliens? Their first thought was UFOs or aliens, as such news was not uncommon here and appeared frequently. But as they looked closely, they realized it was a human. And from the appearance, the figure seemed somewhat familiar? End of chapter. Chapter 129. Chapter 129. At this moment, the figure standing on the clouds in their eyes flickered and then disappeared, as if it had never been there, making them wonder if it was all just an illusion. It probably wasn't an alien. Was that the Messiah just now? A man named James hesitantly said. Hearing this, the others thought back carefully and realized it did look a lot like the Messiah. Although he had a new outfit, it was still black overall, and given his recognizable appearance, they quickly figured it out. It's most likely the Messiah. I think so too. As the passengers were discussing, a flight attendant exclaimed, "This is 10,000 meters high, and the Messiah can actually survive here?" Hearing this, the others realized something was off. Indeed, this was 10,000 meters high. For a moment, they couldn't help but be amazed in their hearts. No wonder he was one of the only 2 Omega mutants. His abilities were indeed terrifying and powerful. If it was the Messiah, walking in the sky at 10,000 meters was only to be expected. Speaking of the Messiah, someone started talking about recent events. The Messiah is powerful, but wasn't he overshadowed by the White Robe Freak? The Omega ability of the White Robe Freak seems to be much more terrifying and powerful. I heard the military even defeated him. I wonder if the Messiah can withstand the military's attacks. The previous man, James, sighed a few more times. The Messiah was powerful, but ultimately no match for military missiles. After all, as long as he was still a living being, he couldn't possibly withstand the siege of various high-powered weapons. While they were discussing, Syd was hiding in the clouds, pondering things. Levitation Flight Level 5, Chaos Magic Level 4, Black Particle Level 4, Reflective Shield Level 4. What should I upgrade next? After a moment's thought, Syd decided to upgrade the Spirit Energy Beam. He had to admit, the Spirit Energy Beam was very useful after the upgrade, being able to fire from his hand. Although not as terrifyingly powerful as the Black Particle, it was much more useful when facing a crowd. After deciding what to upgrade next, Syd looked up at the sky with some hesitation. Staying here increased the recovery speed of his photon energy by at least a third. If he stayed here, his power would grow much faster. But doing so would also expose him to unknown dangers. For example, being discovered by the American military and bombarded with missiles again. Thinking about the plane he encountered earlier, Syd decided to play it safe and return to the city once his photon energy was fully restored. Time passed quickly, and soon his photon energy was fully restored. Photon energy +1. At this moment, Syd felt his photon energy was fuller than ever before. If the previous level 4 abilities allowed him to use it about 110 times, now he could use it around 160 times, a significant increase. His photon energy had increased by nearly half. If he were to face another missile bombardment, he could handle it with ease just by relying on his photon energy. Of course, although the increase in photon energy was nice, Syd still felt it was a bit lacking. Levitation Flight was fine with its constant state having minimal consumption, but if other abilities were upgraded to level 5, the photon energy might not be enough. Thinking about this, Syd shook his head. Let's increase my strength first. Photon energy will increase over time. The next second, a sonic boom sounded, and Syd's figure rapidly descended toward the ground. In less than a minute, he was back in the city. Spirit Energy Beam Experience +1. Syd began practicing the Spirit Energy Beam. Shortly after he left, a few fighter jets appeared in the area he had been, patrolling the skies. After searching for a while without finding anything, they withdrew from the area. However, although the fighter jets left, a satellite quietly focused on the area, monitoring it in real time, ready to alert the monitoring personnel at any sign of abnormality. Fortunately, Syd left early. Otherwise, he might have been discovered. Time flew by, and soon 5 days had passed. During Syd's hiding, nothing significant happened. Meanwhile, a prompt sounded in his ear. Spirit Energy Beam Experience +1. Ability: Spirit Energy Beam, 0/2000, Level 4. With the Spirit Energy Beam upgraded to Level 4, not only was his internal gene modified by a warm current, becoming more complex, but his photon energy also increased again. Ignoring the photon energy, Syd focused on the Spirit Energy Beam. Spirit Energy Beam Experience +1. The next second, blue light blossomed in his right hand. Boom! A nearly 30-meter blue beam of light flashed, plowing the ground instantly. This range. Syd was somewhat surprised. If this was aimed at a crowd, wouldn't it kill a lot of people? Syd felt it was quite good. Besides the ultimate move Sunshine, he finally had another large-scale attack, making up for a not-so-small deficiency. At least, he wouldn't be forced to use Sunshine and drain his photon energy when surrounded. Just as Syd was about to continue testing, his keen hearing picked up the sound of unfamiliar footsteps in the distance. His figure flickered and disappeared from the spot. Not long after, 7 fully armed, well-trained men who didn't look like ordinary people appeared. There's a high-energy reaction here. It's astonishing. A woman in her 30s, wearing a black uniform and holding an instrument, stared solemnly at a deep scratch on the ground. The other 6 members scanned the surroundings. After observing for a while and confirming there was nothing suspicious, a burly man with a brown beard, Brian, muttered, "This scratch looks familiar, like I've seen something similar before?" Thinking for a moment, he suddenly realized something. Eyes widening in surprise, this scratch looks a bit like the one left by the Messiah? Hearing this, the team members examined it closely and indeed found it familiar. They had seen similar marks before. It seemed to be one of the Messiah's abilities. "Brian, are you saying this was left by the Messiah?" Another middle-aged teammate, Fermi, joked. He didn't believe it was left by the Messiah, thinking it was just a coincidence. Brian smiled awkwardly, thinking he might be overthinking it. But just as they all felt they were overthinking, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from behind them. "Who's there?" Everyone turned, alert and ready. End of chapter. Chapter 130. Chapter 130. Brian and the others were startled, instinctively turning around and reaching for their guns, aiming in the direction of the footsteps. At that moment, they saw the appearance of the newcomer. A young man in black, with a handsome face that felt familiar. It was none other than the Messiah they had just been discussing. The Messiah? Brian and the 7 others were shocked. They couldn't believe that just a routine search had actually led them to the Messiah. At the same time, their hearts were filled with panic, their bodies trembling slightly. What do we do now? This is the Messiah. Even though they were holding guns, they had no confidence at all. After all, the Messiah's power was deeply ingrained in their minds, and they knew guns wouldn't be effective. Despite pointing their guns at the Messiah, none of them dared to pull the trigger. Syd stopped, facing them from a distance. "Whose orders are you following?" he asked directly. "Are you searching for my location? What's your purpose?" One of the team members stammered, "No purpose. We just wanted to confirm your location." "Oh, really?" Syd said coldly. "I'll count to 3. If you don't talk." However, when he finished counting, the 7 remained silent. The next second, Syd's body floated slightly, and then he vanished from his spot. Boom! A sonic boom echoed. Syd appeared beside one of the men, punching him in the abdomen. In a blink, the man was sent flying. Clayton! Brian and the others were shocked, first worrying about Clayton's safety. Then, so fast. Was that a sonic boom? They couldn't believe it. When had the Messiah become so fast? According to their information, his speed shouldn't be this fast, especially based on the video analysis from when the Messiah was bombarded by missiles recently. He definitely didn't have this speed. Supersonic speed. Could a human achieve that? Could the recent outrageous rumors be true? That the Messiah's growth rate was extraordinarily fast? Brian and the others were in disbelief. If you don't want to talk, then forget it. Syd's hand glowed with blue light. Spirit Energy Beam Experience +1. With a boom, The blue light flashed. In the end, Syd didn't get any useful information. Even the last person, just before dying, only said that the military wanted to confirm his location, possibly to see if there was an opportunity to use missiles again. Syd didn't care much about this explanation. As for the 7 men, their fate was obvious. After a brief cleanup of the battlefield, Syd quickly left, preparing to continue practicing his abilities. While he was on his way, in Cairo, Egypt's capital, a group of people was searching for something in an underground cave. Egypt. Cairo. Is this the legendary resting place of the god? Several Arab men, wearing headscarves and beards, held flashlights, searching the cave buried under stones. As their flashlight beams illuminated the scene, they saw what had been buried for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian statues, murals, and mysterious hieroglyphs, all exuding an ancient, exotic atmosphere. Tristan and 5 others were there because they had read in an ancient book that over 3,000 years ago, a god had appeared in Egypt. That god had been betrayed by the Egyptians of that time and had eventually fallen into a deep sleep in this place, a ruined pyramid buried underground. After some searching, they found a golden pyramid ion, which should have been at the top of the pyramid. The pyramid ion seemed to be made of pure gold, covered with intricate patterns, looking very mysterious. Tristan and the others circled it once, then gathered around the pyramid ion, chanting prayers with reverence. Almighty God, please grant us power. Please grant us authority. Great and almighty God. We are your faithful followers. Please grant us light, great almighty God. As they chanted, sunlight happened to shine into the cave, illuminating the patterns on the golden pyramid ion, making them glow brilliantly. Look, look. Look, guys. Seeing the radiant golden pyramid ion, the 6 were overjoyed and began chanting their prayers even more fervently. Great almighty God. As their chanting grew louder, a ritual that had been interrupted by the betrayal of the ancient Egyptians reactivated in the pyramid ruins. Golden patterns spread everywhere. Then, deep within the dark ruins of the pyramid, on a stone platform, a man clad in armor with blue skin, who had been asleep, opened his mouth and began breathing heavily. The god Tristan and the others spoke of Apocalypse, opened his eyes. After a moment of adjusting to his body and looking at the stones pressed around him, Apocalypse's eyes turned white, and he activated his power. Purple-white light shone, lifting the stones one by one, causing the entire pyramid ruin to shake. What's happening? Tristan and the others above looked around in panic. Seeing the shaking stones and falling dust, they scrambled out of the cave in fear. Boom! The pyramid ruins exploded, and a tall figure with blue skin slowly emerged from the rubble. As for those 6 men, they were buried under the stones due to their failure to escape in time. Staring at the sun overhead, Apocalypse's eyes showed a trace of confusion. After a while, wearing a black robe, he appeared on the streets of Cairo, Egypt. Seeing the strangely dressed pedestrians and the suddenly approaching cars, Apocalypse felt a bit out of place. What era was it, and who was ruling now? Apocalypse was puzzled. He was also curious about the current situation of his fellow mutants. Were they living better or worse? How had they developed? With these thoughts, Apocalypse walked through the streets of Cairo, observing his surroundings. After some time, he noticed their situation seemed bad. It wasn't like this thousands of years ago. Back then, he was even revered as a god. But now what did he see? Mutants being loathed and even captured by ordinary people? Had the situation for his kind deteriorated this much? End of chapter. Chapter 131. Chapter 131. If Syd were here and saw this blue-skinned man, he would immediately recognize who this guy is. It is none other than Apocalypse, the oldest mutant and the first mutant. During ancient Egypt, he was even worshipped as a god by humans at the time and ruled over ancient Egypt. His abilities are numerous, including but not limited to telekinesis, superstrength, matter manipulation into sand, teleportation, and enhancing other mutants' abilities. The reason he possesses so many abilities is due to his soul transfer ability, or more precisely, energy transfer. He can perform a ritual to take over another person's body, permanently acquiring their abilities. Each time he takes over a mutant, he gains another ability. Over 3,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians, dissatisfied with his rule, rebelled during one of his rituals to take over a mutant with super healing abilities, interrupting the transfer ritual. In the end, the pyramid where the ritual was held collapsed, and his body was protected by his horsemen of Apocalypse, preventing major damage, until now when he has awakened. Cairo, Egypt. On the yellow-toned streets, Sabah-Nur, also known as Apocalypse, was walking. Suddenly, a car almost hit him. Apocalypse showed no fear, ignored the driver's curses, touched the car, and then continued walking as if nothing had happened. At this moment, he saw a mutant being mistreated. Not far away on the street, a small boy wearing ragged pants, naked on the upper body with black patterns, squatted on the ground, surrounded by a group of kids bullying him. "You disgusting freak, mutant germ." The children punched and kicked the boy, ignoring his cries and pleas. At this moment, Apocalypse walked over and stopped them with a gesture. "Stop." Seeing him approach, the children instinctively stopped and looked curiously at this strange man. Not only did he look odd, but even the way he spoke was peculiar. A sturdy boy stood out, hands on his hips, and said, "Who are you? Stay out of our business." Apocalypse didn't say much, grabbed the boy by the collar, and casually threw him several meters away. Ah! Seeing this, the children were terrified, screamed, and fled in panic. "Child, you're safe now." Apocalypse walked to the bullied mutant boy and squatted down. As they tried to communicate, Apocalypse quickly learned the local language using his rapid learning abilities. In less than 10 minutes, they heard footsteps from afar. Apocalypse and the boy turned to see 4 adults holding sticks and other objects. "Did you bully my kid? You freakish clown, do you want to die?" Behind them were several kids, looking smugly at Apocalypse and the boy. One of the burly parents prepared to raise his stick to teach the clown a lesson. But at that moment, they saw the blue-skinned man raise his hand slightly. Instantly, a part of the yellowish wall turned into sand. The sand flashed, and with a puff, the parent ready to strike had his head sliced off by the sand. Ah! Seeing the severed head, the people around showed expressions of horror and began to flee, screaming. The boy on the ground was also startled, stammering, You killed someone?" Apocalypse didn't respond, pulled the boy up, and walked away. Along the way, he collected and learned the modern language while speaking in his broken sentences. "They betrayed me, forgot their god, and deserve punishment." Looking down at the boy, Apocalypse asked, "What's your name?" The boy hesitated and said, "My name is Todd." As they walked along the yellow roads, they began to talk about mutants. "Is life this hard for you now?" Apocalypse asked, confused. "What do you mean?" Todd looked puzzled. "Are you talking about us mutants?" Seeing Apocalypse nod, Todd lowered his head in frustration. "Yes, sir, our situation as mutants is very bad now. Since the light incident, it's gotten worse. Being bullied like I was is considered lucky." "Light incident?" Apocalypse paused but didn't interrupt, continuing to listen. Todd continued, "Some are worse off. I've heard some are taken to labs for inhumane experiments." When he finished, Apocalypse asked, "Isn't anyone resisting?" Hearing this, Todd lowered his head, showing a hint of sadness. Some resisted, but the effect was minimal. They couldn't match the armed forces, and every resistor died. Apocalypse continued, "Don't you have strong ones among you? Are they all as weak as you?" "Weak." Todd felt embarrassed. Apocalypse nodded. In his eyes, whether it was Todd or someone several levels stronger, they were all weak. A confidence from being the strongest mutant of his era. "Are mutants of this era so weak?" Seeing Apocalypse nod, Todd then thought of something and said, "There are, like the Messiah." Just as he was about to say more, they heard footsteps again. Apocalypse and Todd turned to see a modern armed squad approaching. "It's the army, we have to run." Todd, scared, widened his eyes in fear. He tried to pull Apocalypse's hand to run, but Apocalypse remained unmoved, standing still. Todd was nearly in tears, looking at the surrounding soldiers with their black guns aimed at them, his legs almost giving way in fear. Seeing the two, the leading soldier with a full black beard smirked, aiming his gun at them. "Two mutant scums. Don't you know where you are? This isn't a place for you to be arrogant. Just because you have some mutant abilities, you think you can do whatever you want? You have a lot of nerve. Do you think you're the Messiah? You're seeking death." Todd was nearly in tears, while Apocalypse, N-Sabah-Nur, was moved. Messiah? End of chapter. Chapter 132. Chapter 132. Extra chapter. Messiah? This was the second time Apocalypse had heard this name, the first being from the boy Todd, and now from this bearded man. From both Todd's and this man's expressions and tone, it was clear they highly valued this person. Messiah. Is he a strong person in your era? N-Sabah-Nur asked. Listening to his words, the scared and anxious Todd froze, as did the sneering soldiers like Charlie and some bystanders. Discussions erupted. "Are you from Antarctica? How do you not know the Messiah? Is this a joke?" Whether it was the bystanders or the soldiers, no one believed that in this age, someone wouldn't know about the Messiah, thinking he was mocking the military. The bearded man Charlie snorted, "Are you playing with us? If so, then I think you've succeeded." He sneered menacingly. Do you really think you are the Messiah? Just you. Watch as I put a few holes in you. Seeing him about to act, Apocalypse continued. Is he very strong? Are you afraid of him? Charlie, who was about to shoot, paused and laughed out of anger. A soldier beside him said, I think this guy isn't mocking us. He's just a madman. Who doesn't know the Messiah? Even Omega mutants are aware of the Messiah. The word struck a chord with N-Saba-Nur, and he paused. Next to him, Todd, seeing his expression, thought he truly didn't know and quickly explained. Here, mutants are classified into 5 levels, from level 1 to level 5. Those considered the greatest threat, even an ultimate threat, are called Omega mutants. Omega mutants possess incredible power, representing infinite potential and possibilities. They are like gods among us mutants. Todd quickly recounted information about Omega mutants, something everyone knew since the Light incident. The surrounding soldiers and bystanders also knew this information. However, hearing Todd's explanation, N-Saba-Nur was stunned. Omega mutants. He muttered. As the former ruler of Egypt, he knew some legends about Omega mutants even in his time. Back then, both ordinary people and other mutants believed Omega mutants didn't exist. These mutants with undefined and unmeasurable power limits were only legends, and even in 10,000 years, one might not appear. Even as the ancestor of mutants, with numerous abilities, he was only at the peak of level 4, between level 4 and level 5. Yet, in this era, Omega mutants had appeared? How was this possible? His first reaction was disbelief. You say the Messiah is an Omega mutant? To confirm, he described the characteristics of Omega mutants. A mutant with undefined and unmeasurable power limits? Of course, Todd said. While Apocalypse was in shock, Todd and others displayed expressions of, how could he not know the Messiah, even thinking he was mad. Todd even added another shocking statement for Apocalypse. And there's not just one Omega mutant, there's another. What did you say? Apocalypse was utterly shocked. 2 Omega mutants? Having one was already astonishing, but 2? Apocalypse found it hard to accept. Knowing he needed more information, Todd continued naturally. Yes, there's also the white-clothed freak. His powers are mysterious, rumored to alter and twist things, changing large-scale reality with just a word. He's terrifying. Thinking there might be a mistake between their definitions of Omega mutants, Apocalypse was stunned. From the abilities alone, he could tell this white-clothed freak was likely an Omega mutant. At this moment, N-Saba-Nur's heart raced, both shocked and excited. If he could control an Omega mutant, take over their body through the transfer ritual, he might acquire their Omega abilities. His heart pounded at the thought. An Omega mutant, a being he had sought during his reign but never found. This was the body he had always desired. At this moment, whether out of curiosity or greed, he wanted to meet the Messiah and the white-clothed freak. Meanwhile, Charlie grew impatient. Have you talked enough? If so, stay quiet and don't resist. Maybe I'll spare your lives. He prepared to use force, but only Todd was scared. The strange blue-skinned mutant showed no fear and spoke solemnly. Thank you for telling me about the Omega mutants. As a token of gratitude, I will let you leave here. Charlie and the others couldn't believe it and started laughing. Ignoring their warnings, as they prepared to act, Apocalypse raised his right hand slightly. In the next second, sand swirled beneath the Egyptian soldier's feet. Open fire. Charlie reacted quickly, pulling the trigger while shouting to his comrades. Bang! 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 However, all bullets shot at the blue-skinned man were blocked by a transparent shield. In the next second, the sand pierced the soldiers' necks. They fell like water, powerless against the sand. Even avoiding it was impossible. Seeing the soldiers fall rapidly, the bystanders and Todd were shocked. Monster. Another monster. Charlie muttered his last words, falling to the ground in despair and disbelief. They couldn't understand how they encountered another mutant like a monster. Ah! The distant bystanders screamed and fled. Todd was stunned by the scene. Before he could recover, a purple energy shield enveloped them, and they were teleported to another place by Apocalypse's space teleportation ability. Ignoring Todd's gaping expression, the ancestor of mutants, Apocalypse, spoke warmly. Child, continue telling me about the Messiah. End of chapter. Chapter 133. Chapter 133. Todd, snapping out of his shock, hurriedly said, This isn't the place to talk. Come home with me first, and we can talk later. Clearly, he was terrified and worried something else might happen, believing home to be safer. Looking around and seeing familiar surroundings, Todd breathed a sigh of relief and immediately pulled Apocalypse by the hand, running towards his home. After more than 20 minutes, They arrived at a shabby little house. With a creak, Todd pushed open the wooden door and led Apocalypse inside. The interior was dim, and the only appliance in sight was an old television. Seeing the environment, Apocalypse asked, "Your parents?" While tidying up the messy house, Todd casually replied, "When they found out I was a mutant, they kicked me out, but they still send me some living expenses each month, so at least I don't starve." Noticing Apocalypse's gaze lingering on the old TV, Todd quickly said, "I found that TV in the trash. Do you want to watch it?" He turned on the TV. As the TV powered on, colorful images began to play on the screen. Staring at the TV, Sabah walked over and touched the screen. In the next moment, the TV screen seemed to be interfered with, flickering for an instant. "What are you doing?" Todd asked, puzzled. Apocalypse's eyes turned white, a sign that he was using his powers. "I'm learning." At this moment, various images flashed in his mind, including TV shows, news, and even information from search engines. In a short time, vast amounts of modern knowledge were absorbed through the internet, at a speed comparable to or even faster than artificial intelligence. Weapons. Images of modern weapons appeared in his mind, including firearms, missiles, and even nuclear mushroom clouds. Superpowers. Scenes of different countries flashed in his mind, finally focusing on the United States. Weak humans, ruling this world. They betrayed me. After watching these, Apocalypse evaluated, these false gods, rulers, will cease to exist. Because the only god in this world, I, Apocalypse, will return. Todd, listening to his muttering, found it increasingly strange. Apocalypse continued, "This world needs purification and salvation. The world will no longer belong to them." Todd was dumbfounded. "You're really weird. Are you from Antarctica, like people say, dreaming of ruling the world?" Apocalypse ignored him, or rather, he was attracted to something strange. After acquiring and learning a lot of knowledge, he also noticed that the world had recently changed, many things had shifted. Sabah was intrigued, believing that a mysterious force had changed these things. What changed everything? While he pondered and learned modern knowledge, a video of him slaughtering soldiers on the street was uploaded online. Due to the attention mutants like Messiah and the white-clothed freak garnered, combined with Apocalypse's displayed power, the video quickly attracted significant attention. Where did this mutant come from? He looks so terrifying. Are there so many powerful mutants? Watching the video, many people were shocked. Meanwhile, the tremors caused by Apocalypse's emergence from the pyramid also caught many people's attention. People far away could feel their houses shaking. Because of this, Professor X was currently discussing the matter with Agent Coulson of S.H.I.E.L.D. While organizing documents, Agent Coulson said, "Since mutants appeared, we've been investigating their history. We discovered something interesting about the first mutant in the world. He was an ancient person, disappearing thousands of years ago." Professor X and others like Cyclops showed surprised expressions. Mutants existed that long ago? Aren't mutants a modern phenomenon? Agent Coulson shook his head. "It does seem incredible, but according to our intelligence, mutants might have existed tens of thousands of years ago, with the first mutant emerging in that period." After speaking, Agent Coulson got to the point. Although this first mutant disappeared thousands of years ago, there's a legend that he would reappear. Has he appeared? Professor X asked in surprise. Can he live that long? Cyclops and others also found it incredible. A mutant who lived for tens of thousands of years? Agent Coulson explained, according to records, this first mutant has a unique ability to transfer his consciousness to other bodies. Whenever he's near death, he finds an ordinary person or a mutant to transfer his consciousness to. Notably, he absorbs the abilities of those mutants after each transfer. An omnipotent mutant? Professor X remarked. Yes. Agent Coulson said seriously. Recently, we detected a tremor in the capital of Egypt. According to our informant, it was likely caused by this first mutant. Although records indicate that the modern era has the most mutants, ancient times had few, but over tens of thousands of years, who knows how many abilities this first mutant has accumulated. The combined abilities are terrifying, making one wonder how powerful he might be. Hearing this, Professor X and the other X-Men felt a heavy burden. Agent Coulson finally said, "Professor Charles, we need your help to locate this first mutant. Can you do it?" Professor X nodded. A while later, the group stood outside a door to a secret room. Suddenly, Agent Coulson asked, "Is this the Cerebro? Professor Charles, have you thought about using it to find the Messiah and the white-clothed freak?" End of chapter. Chapter 134. Chapter 134. You don't need to tell us. We've already considered that, Cyclops said, glancing at Agent Coulson. Unfortunately, both the Messiah and the white-clothed freak seem to be able to block the professor's telepathic searches. Maybe that's just a special trait of Omega mutants? Agent Coulson looked surprised, clearly not expecting this. Do all Omega mutants have such a characteristic? While he pondered this, Professor Charles Xavier had already entered the cerebro chamber and donned the helmet that amplified his telepathic abilities. Professor, let me help you with the coordinates. Hank McCoy, covered in blue fur, operated the machine, locking the search range onto Cairo, Egypt. Soon, the cerebro chamber projected red silhouettes, each representing a mutant. Voices occasionally buzzed around them. Before long, Professor Xavier opened his eyes. I think I found him. Found him? Agent Coulson and the others perked up. At this moment, in Cairo, Egypt, just as Professor Xavier located the ancient mutant Apocalypse, Sabanur, who possessed countless abilities, also discovered him. Apocalypse gazed intently in a direction, murmuring, "How fascinating." Clearly, he sensed Professor Xavier's telepathic wave and, through it, vaguely perceived numerous people. Such a range. What's fascinating? Todd asked curiously. I found my answer, Apocalypse replied cryptically. Apocalypse knew that his final piece to ascend to a level 5 mutant had appeared. If he could take over the body of this person with incredible psychic powers, he would become a level 5 mutant. Back in the cerebro chamber. Professor, what's wrong? Everyone noticed Professor Xavier had suddenly fallen silent, and upon closer inspection, his eyes had turned black, a clear sign of mind control. At that moment, something shocking happened. A purple, water-like energy shield suddenly appeared outside the cerebro chamber door. As the purple energy shield opened, two figures, one large and one small, materialized. It was Apocalypse and Todd, who had located the place and teleported there. Who are you? What do you want? Stop. Seeing the tall blue figure approaching, the X-Men issued warnings. When he continued to advance and the professor fell into an inexplicable state, Scott couldn't hold back. He raised his right hand and fired a laser beam. Boom! The red laser shot out, hurtling towards Apocalypse at an astonishing speed. However, to Scott, Storm, and the others' surprise, an invisible shield appeared, effortlessly blocking the laser. No matter how long Scott attacked, he couldn't break through, and the intruder's footsteps never faltered, still approaching leisurely. Realizing the dire situation, Agent Coulson drew his gun, Storm's hands crackled with lightning, and Logan's claws extended. Bang! 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 Boom! 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 Unfortunately, their combined attacks failed to break the invisible shield or halt Apocalypse's advance. They were shocked, feeling helpless and desperate. Who are you? How are you so powerful? Are you the ancient mutant ancestor? Agent Coulson's mind raced, and the others were equally stunned. Ignoring them, Apocalypse walked straight to the wheelchair-bound Professor X. A purple energy shield enveloped them. In the next second, Apocalypse, Todd, and Professor X vanished from the cerebro chamber. Professor. Helpless to stop it, Scott and the others were left in chaos. What does he want with the professor? Logan frowned. Agent Coulson suddenly had a terrifying thought. I think it's bad. This ancient mutant might want to take over Professor Charles's body to gain his abilities. The realization left Logan and the others horrified. They couldn't fathom how powerful an already formidable ancient mutant would become with Professor X's psychic abilities, or what he might do. But we're no match for him. How can we save the professor? Scott said in despair. Recalling the earlier scene, he felt suffocated. Not just him. Storm and the others felt the same. Even combined, they couldn't break the invisible shield around the ancient mutant. The gap was so vast it left them hopeless. They couldn't think of a way to rescue the professor. If only Jean were here, Scott sighed. If Jean were here, maybe she could have stopped him? Sadly. At this moment, a burly, bearded man who had been silent until now, Chris, suddenly spoke up. Maybe I have a way to save the professor. Huh. Everyone's eyes turned to this unassuming man. What way? Storm asked, puzzled. Under their gaze, Chris said solemnly. Maybe only the Messiah can save the professor now. We can ask him for help. Scott and the others were stunned. Indeed, maybe only the Messiah could save the professor now. But we have no relationship with the Messiah. He wouldn't help us. Storm sighed. Chris shook his head, glancing at Logan. Logan and I both know the Messiah, and the Messiah might have a reason to save the professor. What? Everyone, including Storm, Agent Coulson, and Logan, looked surprised and puzzled. How could he be so sure the Messiah would save the professor? It was strange. Watching his expression, they felt confused and bewildered. Meanwhile, another problem arose. How to contact the Messiah. Scott and the others exchanged glances. As a SHIELD member, Agent Coulson spoke up. "Leave contacting the Messiah to me." They quickly sprang into action. While they moved, Professor X, taken by Apocalypse, woke up. End of chapter. Chapter 135. Chapter 135. Charles Xavier, taken by Apocalypse, opened his eyes and awoke. As soon as he woke up, he looked around and found himself in a dimly lit living room. At the same time, he also saw Apocalypse and the boy Todd nearby. Holding his head, Professor X murmured, "Such incredible power." When Apocalypse controlled him, he felt the immense power within Apocalypse, a power that left him unable to resist. "What have you done to me?" Instinctively, Professor X tried to use his abilities but failed, feeling his psychic powers rendered ineffective. Apocalypse looked down at him and explained, "I can block you from entering others' minds. This is a talent I acquired over tens of thousands of years of reincarnation." He paused, looking at Professor X with admiration. "However, the ability to perceive others' thoughts and control them is your talent." This ability to sense and control the minds of many amazed and intrigued Apocalypse. It was precisely what he lacked. With this ability, he could control everyone in the world. Moreover, he wouldn't need a device like Cerebro. Professor X's abilities could be perfectly integrated into him. Or rather, their potential was sufficient, but they hadn't fully realized it. Apocalypse, skilled in enhancing others' abilities, would naturally bring out this potential in himself. Looking down at Professor X, Apocalypse said slowly, "I want you to convey my message to everyone in the world. Tell them that Apocalypse has returned and that this world will be turned to ruins. This is my punishment to humanity, from En Saban. His voice was cold, showing little compassion for the humans who had once betrayed him. Apocalypse squatted down, staring directly into Professor X's eyes. "Now, relay my message." Professor X frowned, unwilling, and said, "Even if I wanted to without Cerebro, I can't simultaneously enter so many minds." Hearing this, Apocalypse shook his head, amused. "You don't need any machine to amplify your abilities. I can help you." "What?" Professor X found this hard to believe. Apocalypse's eyes turned white, signaling the activation of his powers. At the same time, Professor X felt a power infusing his body, unlocking his psychic abilities, making them stronger than ever before. Only when using Cerebro had he felt this strong, able to easily connect with every mind in the world. After a brief attempt, realizing he couldn't resist this ancient mutant's power and that Apocalypse could cut off this enhanced state at any moment, Professor X had no choice but to comply. He also had his own plan, hoping to use this opportunity to warn others about Apocalypse and prepare them for the coming threat. In the next second, with his cooperation, Apocalypse's words were transmitted to every mind on the planet. "Listen, everyone in this world." As the words fell, people around the world were startled, instinctively looking around in disbelief. What's happening? Who is speaking? Due to the telepathic communication, there were no language barriers, so everyone heard Professor X's words. Even the deaf could hear. At S.H.I.E.L.D., Director Nick Fury's expression grew grave. At Stark Tower, Tony Stark paused his work on a new suit. In the midst of countless people's confusion, Professor X's message continued. "This is my warning to all of you, humans and mutants alike. You have lost your way, but I have returned, and the final judgment is at hand. All your buildings, your towers, will fall, and a new era will begin. For your future, you no longer have a choice." The voice echoed in the ears of nearly everyone in the world. Walking on the street, Syd Castell frowned. He noticed the odd expressions of people around him and vaguely sensed a mental wave enveloping the area. Subconsciously, he connected with this mental wave, and he heard Professor X's words. Thinking quickly, Syd realized what was happening. Apocalypse. From his memory, only Apocalypse's situation matched this scenario. But wasn't Apocalypse's story supposed to happen after days of future past? Syd felt something was off. Then he understood. Apocalypse had always been there, regardless of the timeline. The difference was whether someone disturbed him, causing him to awaken. This could be troublesome. Syd frowned. His intuition told him he and Apocalypse wouldn't coexist peacefully. Whether or not he interfered, Apocalypse would likely seek him out. If he were an ordinary or slightly powerful mutant, they might coexist peacefully. But Syd doubted Apocalypse would ignore an Omega-level mutant appearing before him. It was as absurd as ignoring a $100 bill lying on the ground. With his body-snatching ability, if he had the chance, he'd definitely trouble me. Even if we temporarily coexist, if I become vulnerable, he'd surely act. After all, an Omega mutant before him, ready to be taken, would tempt anyone. Syd murmured to himself. Not just Apocalypse. Anyone would be tempted. Clearly, peaceful coexistence was unlikely. While pondering, Syd sensed something and tensed. As he connected to the mental wave, both Professor X and Apocalypse sensed him. Given the strength of Syd's mental power, he stood out like an elephant among ants, impossible to ignore. End of chapter. Chapter 136. Chapter 136. In the shabby house, Apocalypse squinted his eyes and secretly used his abilities, attempting to invade this person's mind with Professor X's powers. However, Syd was prepared. His eyes glowed red as he used his considerable psychic strength to forcefully break free from the mental link, causing Apocalypse to lose his target. But in the final moment, he heard a voice resonate in his mind. I will find you. Hearing this voice, Syd frowned. In the old wooden house, both Professor X and Apocalypse were left guessing about the powerful psychic presence that had intruded. Although their perception was a bit fuzzy, they still vaguely sensed the intruder's strength. An Omega mutant? Apocalypse squinted. Whether or not the intruder was an Omega mutant, such a powerful individual could not remain unknown. They would inevitably meet again. Thinking this, he glanced down at Professor X. As long as he could obtain this man's abilities, he would possess even greater power, unafraid even of Omega mutants. Even now, with his numerous abilities, he did not fear Omega mutants. Looking at Professor X, Apocalypse said, "Let's continue." Soon, after a moment of silence, Professor X's voice once again echoed in everyone's minds. Apocalypse spoke slowly. The purpose of conveying this message is simple. To tell the strongest among you, those with great power, that this world is about to belong to you. Originally repeating Apocalypse's words verbatim, Professor X suddenly altered the last sentence. Those with great power, protect those around you. This is what I want to tell you. Apocalypse's eyes returned to their normal color as he cut off the enhancement and looked at Professor X with a displeased expression. As Professor X finished speaking, reactions varied worldwide. At S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury's expression grew serious as he gripped his pager, contemplating whether to summon Captain Marvel to confront this ancient mutant. Thinking it over, Nick Fury sighed. Mutants are truly dangerous. First the Messiah, then the white-clothed freak, and now this ancient mutant. Each one stronger than the last. Elsewhere, the X-Men, in the midst of their mission, also heard the message. Recognizing Professor X's voice, they knew time was of the essence and quickened their pace. Before long, at the Brotherhood of Mutants base, a black jet landed. Sensing the commotion, Magneto, Mystique, and others emerged. Seeing the familiar jet and the descending Scott and others, Magneto frowned. You guys again? What do you want, and what was that voice? It must have been Charles. What is he up to? Facing him, Scott stepped forward sincerely. Magneto, we need your help. He then briefly explained the situation with Apocalypse and Professor X's kidnapping. Hearing this, Magneto's face darkened. Although he often clashed with Charles, he didn't want anyone else to harm him. Of course, he simply didn't want Charles to die. After some thought, he agreed to join Scott and the others in their fight against Apocalypse. The group boarded the jet, heading for Cairo, Egypt. Meanwhile, Agent Coulson, using S.H.I.E.L.D.'s technology, intelligence, and special tools, located the Messiah's region. Soon, Syd saw a group of black-clad agents holding signs on the street. Scanning the signs, which mentioned needing his help against Apocalypse, Syd frowned and pondered for a moment before stepping out of a secluded corner. Dressed in a suit, middle-aged with a slight baldness, Agent Coulson paced anxiously nearby. Is the Messiah not in this area? He felt increasingly worried. Just then, a black-clad figure emerging caught his attention. In an instant, he recognized him. Messiah! Ignoring the agent's attempts to stop him, Coulson ran to Syd. Messiah, we need your help. Could you? He spoke nervously, unsure if the Messiah would agree. Standing beside such a formidable figure, he wasn't as calm as he appeared. Cold sweat dotted his forehead as he felt the pressure. Syd, aware of what he wanted, contemplated. If Apocalypse hadn't declared he would find him, he might have ignored him for a while. But now, after a moment of thought, to Coulson and the other agent's surprise, he nodded in agreement. All right, lead the way. I need to meet Apocalypse anyway, he said expressionlessly. Coulson, thrilled, hurriedly led him to a waiting helicopter. Seeing his slow pace, Syd frowned and said, Coulson, right? No need for the helicopter. Just point me to Cairo, Egypt. Ha! Coulson, startled, instinctively pulled out a device, checked the satellite map, and pointed left. In the next second, Syd effortlessly grabbed Coulson by the collar and floated into the air. With a swoosh, they sped toward Cairo. Feeling the wind rush past, Coulson was inwardly shocked. Watching the rapidly receding scenery, he murmured, "So this is the Messiah's speed. It's incredible." Seeing it in a video was nothing compared to experiencing it firsthand. This was much faster than a helicopter. If only he knew that Syd could fly even faster, breaking the sound barrier. If not for his concern about Coulson's well-being, who knows what he'd think. In Cairo, Egypt, Apocalypse stood with Professor X on a high vantage point, overlooking the capital below. "What are you planning?" Professor X felt a bad premonition. "You'll know soon enough," Apocalypse glanced at him, saying indifferently. In the next second, he raised his hands, aiming at the distant city. End of chapter. Chapter 137. Chapter 137. Apocalypse's eyes suddenly turned white, signaling the activation of his abilities. In the shocked eyes of Professor X and the boy Todd, a few kilometers around the city center began to change. Buildings, vehicles, and the land itself rapidly transformed into sand, swirling into the sky and converging towards the city center. Help! Ah! The people of Egypt's capital were left in shock and terror. They could hardly believe the horrific scene unfolding before their eyes. Buildings and countless vehicles were quickly disintegrating into sand. For a moment, sand filled the air, creating a breathtaking scene. Witnessing this transformation, akin to a god's creation and destruction, countless people screamed and fled in panic. During this chaos, some captured the terrifying scene on video, posting it online, while others frantically called the police for help. Quickly, netizens from other cities noticed the events unfolding and were instantly stunned. "Oh my God, is this a miracle?" In the eyes of many, the sand swirling towards the city center formed a grand pyramid. Bathed in sunlight, the massive pyramid stood majestically in the city center, creating an awe-inspiring sight. This spectacle gave people the illusion that past pyramids might have been built this way, leaving them in awe. As time passed, more netizens noticed the anomalies in Cairo, Egypt. Several satellites locked onto the area, observing the changes. Soon, they spotted Apocalypse, Professor X, and others standing prominently in an open area. The surviving citizens, netizens, and leaders worldwide were all abuzz with discussion. Is it another mutant? The power this person displays rivals that of the Messiah, doesn't it? Besides the Messiah's light destruction incident, this was the second time they had witnessed such a terrifying scene. Quickly, detailed information about Apocalypse spread worldwide. At Stark Tower, alerted by Jarvis, Tony Stark saw the information on Apocalypse. The first mutant in history? Was the earlier voice also because of him? With such power, who can defeat this man? Looking at Apocalypse's information and then at his mark suits, Tony Stark felt a sense of helplessness. He wasn't the only one. Netizens following the events in Cairo, Egypt, felt equally shocked and breathless. Using his abilities to nearly dismantle an entire city, could anyone truly stand against him? Leaders of countries like the United States even considered drastic measures, thinking about launching missiles or nukes to destroy Cairo and kill the fearsome Apocalypse. Unfortunately, before they could prepare for action, those weapons malfunctioned under Professor X's psychic control, or the devices were destroyed. For the moment, modern long-range high-power weapons were rendered useless. Terrifying. Is this still a mutant? Seeing this, people from various countries felt helpless, even thinking this guy was scarier than the Messiah. After all, the Messiah couldn't do this. Apocalypse seemed truly unbeatable. In Cairo, Egypt, Apocalypse naturally sensed the new attentions but didn't mind, openly displaying his power. The scene of nearly destroying a city, unsurprisingly, filled the humans with fear. Apocalypse smiled contentedly. As he prepared to take Professor X to the newly created pyramid for the body transfer ritual, before he could set up the site, a black jet appeared outside the pyramid. The X-jet landed on the yellow ground, and a group of people, watched by Apocalypse, Professor X, and Todd, emerged. It was Magneto and his team. Eric. Professor X, lying on the ground, was surprised. After expressing his surprise, he anxiously addressed Eric and the others. "Get out of here quickly. You are no match for this man." Having witnessed the earlier scene, he had accepted his fate and didn't want his old friend Eric and the others to get hurt. He also didn't believe they could defeat this terrifying monster. "Charles, what are you saying?" Magneto Eric frowned. "I didn't come all this way to hear you say that." Before Professor X could continue, Apocalypse showed interest. Gazing at Storm and the others, especially Magneto Eric, he said with interest, My children, I can sense the great power within you. Would you like to join me? Spreading his arms, he continued loudly. This world doesn't belong to humans. It belongs to those of you with great power. Join me, and we'll create a new world. Despite his grand talk, Magneto was momentarily tempted, but, after glancing at Charles, his temptation subsided. The next second, Magneto said seriously, "Let Charles go, and I will join you." Eric. Professor X was anxious, wanting to say something. However, before he could finish, Apocalypse shook his head. "That's unfortunate. I need Charles's abilities and cannot return him to you." Once his weaknesses were addressed, no one could stop him, so he wouldn't give up Professor X for Magneto. Finally, he said, "You can leave now, and I won't harm you." While they talked, satellites captured the scene, transmitting it to leaders worldwide. Due to public demand and previous precedents, this event was also broadcasted to countless viewers online. What are they discussing? Wait, someone is attacking. It looks like they're in conflict. Under countless watchful eyes, as talks broke down, Logan and the others exchanged glances and immediately attacked, aiming to rescue the professor by force. The next second, Magneto spread his right hand, and from the distant city ruins, countless metal objects floated up, densely filling the sky. With a swoosh, the static objects suddenly moved, disappearing in an instant, shooting towards Apocalypse at an incredible speed. End of chapter. Chapter 138. Chapter 138. At almost the same moment, Storm's hands crackled with lightning, and a massive bolt shot towards Apocalypse. Cyclops pressed his visor, and twin red laser beams burst from his eyes. Chris emitted a red glow, and Wolverine extended his claws. Boom! 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 Metal, lightning, and lasers bombarded Apocalypse. However, to the shock of the X-Men and the watching netizens, an invisible shield blocked all the attacks, remaining steadfast. No matter how much power Magneto, Cyclops, and Storm unleashed, the shield showed no signs of breaking. Standing within the shield, Apocalypse's expression remained calm, unfazed by their combined assault. Impossible! Magneto, Cyclops, and the others were astonished. In this moment, they felt immense pressure and a sense of suffocation. No one understood better than them the power they had unleashed, especially Magneto, a level 4 mutant. Yet, even with their combined strength, they couldn't break the invisible shield? The disparity in power was so vast it left them all in despair. Not only were they shocked, but so were the spectators, including members of S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, and other organizations. Is that Magneto? Even he can't break this guy's shield. The combined attack of these mutants is comparable to a continuous missile barrage, isn't it? Apocalypse's defense seems even more terrifying than the Messiah's. Many people recalled the video of the Messiah being bombarded by missiles. From the Messiah's previous display, he struggled against continuous missile attacks, often choosing to evade. Yet, Apocalypse could withstand it effortlessly? Does this mean Apocalypse might be stronger than the Messiah? Those who thought this felt a surge of shock and fear. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Gradually, Storm felt exhausted, and Cyclops' eyes began to ache. Although his eyes connected to a mysterious particle space, allowing continuous laser emission, his eyes couldn't withstand prolonged use and started to hurt. Instinctively, he closed his eyes, stopping the laser beams. Storm also ceased her attacks. Eventually, only Magneto continued controlling the metal barrage. Occasionally, Wolverine swung his adamantium claws, attempting to cut through the shield. But neither he nor anyone else could break the invisible barrier. After some time, even Magneto had to pause to catch his breath, and silence fell over the scene. Everyone was enveloped in silence and despair. Damn it! How do we fight this? Wolverine was the first to lose his cool, cursing loudly. Despite his outburst, it couldn't hide his panic and helplessness. So this is the difference between us? Who would have thought there'd be such a powerful mutant, an all-powerful mutant at that? Hank murmured. His words echoed the sentiments of Magneto, Professor X, and everyone watching through satellites. Seeing them quiet down, Apocalypse smiled faintly. All right, children, just stay put. He raised his right hand. In the next second, countless sand particles emerged, spreading over the desperate X-Men, quickly binding them and rendering them immobile. Due to their exhaustion from using their powers, they couldn't break free from the sand's restraint. Apocalypse had no intention of killing them outright. To prevent them from interfering, this was his way of dealing with them for now. He then led Professor X, step by step, towards the pyramid. Magneto and the others knew what he intended to do. It's over. They understood the consequences of Professor X losing his powers, more than anyone else. They also knew the terrifying potential of his abilities. As they were at a loss, a mysterious ethereal music began to play. Simultaneously, a satellite captured a figure swiftly approaching the pyramid. What is this? The divine and ethereal music grew clearer, and the rapidly approaching figure came into focus, revealing Syd, who had left Agent Coulson behind to fly at top speed. Apocalypse stopped and looked up. He saw a handsome, mysterious young man in black, floating silently in the sky. An aura of strangeness surrounded him, blending with the world, one with all things, appearing both godlike and omnipresent. Compared to Apocalypse, who claimed to be a god with his blue skin, the appearance of Syd as the Messiah looked more divine to Magneto and countless viewers. No matter how many times they saw it, this feeling remained, leaving them in awe. Below, listening to the mysterious, ethereal music, Magneto was surprised. Did you guys actually bring the Messiah to help us? We have no relation with the Messiah. Why would he help us? His words echoed the confusion and astonishment of Storm, Cyclops, and the others. They hadn't expected the terrifying Messiah to actually come to help them. They initially thought Chris was just talking. Actually, the Messiah is... Facing their puzzled gazes, Chris hesitated, wanting to explain. Seeing his hesitation, Magneto and the others grew even more confused. At this moment, you are the Messiah? The rumored Omega Mutant? Apocalypse and Sabah looked up at the floating youth with admiration. Standing on the ground, looking up, and Syd Castell floating above, looking down, the atmosphere grew tense. The netizens observing through satellites began to discuss. Gasp, it really is the Messiah. Despite their surprise, many shook their heads, doubting the Messiah's chances. Although the Messiah's power was formidable, from the video of him resisting missiles, it seemed unlikely he could defeat Apocalypse. End of chapter. Chapter 139. Chapter 139. Many people recalled the video they had seen not long ago, where the Messiah's defense did not seem particularly strong, certainly not as impressive as Apocalypse's. In such circumstances, whether the Messiah could defeat Apocalypse was a question mark. At this moment, Apocalypse looked at the floating youth in the sky with amazement. He could vaguely sense the terrifying energy within the youth. Although he could not pinpoint it exactly, it proved that this youth was indeed formidable, and the title of Omega Mutant was well-deserved. Furthermore, if the Messiah was this strong, what about the white-clad Omega Mutant? Apocalypse's mind wandered back to the information he had gathered about the white-clad Omega Mutant during his research on this era. From the various reports and human evaluations, the white-clad Omega Mutant appeared to be far stronger than the Messiah, with abilities even more astounding. Facing the bizarre power of distorting reality, even Apocalypse felt uncertain and unsure of how to counter it, not knowing if the opponent's abilities had any limitations. However, he did not feel particularly anxious about the Messiah in front of him. He had reviewed the Messiah's data and videos, knowing well enough the extent of his power, which was not enough to make him fear. After all, the Messiah was still too young. Not just him, but Professor X and others were also worried. Based on the Messiah's previous display of power and Apocalypse's current display, the Messiah did not seem to have a significant advantage. If even the Messiah lost, the terrifying consequences made them shudder. If the Messiah's abilities were also taken, then who could resist Apocalypse? The white-clad hero? Under the gazes of countless eyes, Syd raised his right hand, and black particles flickered. Black particle experience +1. The next second, the level 4 black particles, like bullets, shot towards Apocalypse from a distance of over 30 meters. Facing Syd's probing attack, Apocalypse did not do anything initially but maintained the invisible shield. He wanted to see how strong this Messiah's power was, whether it was as formidable as the data suggested. In the blink of an eye, the fluctuating black particles reached Apocalypse. Then, contrary to Syd's expectations and Apocalypse's, the following occurred. The black particles approached the mutant progenitor Apocalypse and came into contact with the invisible shield. The two forces stood in a standoff. The black particles stopped moving and continued to fluctuate on the surface of the invisible shield. Even spatial abilities can be blocked? Syd thought to himself. He hadn't anticipated that the invincible black particles would encounter a setback. However, he quickly relaxed. The black particles and the invisible shield only remained in a standoff for less than a second before the black particles pierced through the invisible shield in the astonished eyes of Magneto and the others. With a soft thud, the black particles pierced through Apocalypse's chest, leaving a gory wound the size of a human head. It was horrifying to see through the gaping hole to the other side. It seemed as if flesh and bone were being devoured by the black waves. This is it. Seeing this scene, whether it was Magneto and others, or Tony and others who were watching through satellite feeds and drone footage from the Egyptian authorities, everyone felt shocked and stunned. The invisible shield, which had withstood the combined attacks of Magneto and others, was broken in an instant by that black attack. Does this mean that the Messiah's attack alone surpassed the combined strength of these mutants? In an instant, they were once again aware of the Messiah's fearsome power, and Nick Fury and others from S.H.I.E.L.D. grew somber. Of course, what also stunned them was this. How could the supposedly divine Apocalypse be defeated and killed just like that? After all, a person with a gaping hole the size of a head in their chest could not possibly survive, right? Yet Syd did not relax, continuing to watch Apocalypse with a cautious gaze. This power. Apocalypse's calm expression vanished in an instant, replaced by surprise as he touched his chest, seemingly feeling no pain. My child, you truly live up to the title of Omega Mutant. Truly astonishing. Apocalypse admired the Messiah floating in the sky. Meanwhile, under the watchful eyes of Magneto and Nick Fury from S.H.I.E.L.D., the wound on Apocalypse's chest was rapidly healing. Self-healing ability? Magneto said in astonishment. The already terrifying figure had a self-healing ability? In this case, besides Omega mutants, no other existence could handle this monster, right? Logan and others also felt a suffocating pressure. Not to mention them, even the public watching through satellites were horrified. Is this what a self-proclaimed divine being looks like? Just watching made them feel despair. With such strong abilities and terrifying self-healing capabilities, who could be a match for him? The pressure on the Messiah could be imagined. He must be feeling quite desperate now. Some even wondered if the Messiah would flee. Yet, contrary to their expectations, the Messiah not only did not despair but also said something that left them stunned. So you do have a self-healing ability. Syd said nonchalantly. Apocalypse, before falling into a deep slumber, had possessed a mutant with a self-healing ability, one that was even comparable to Logan's. In fact, visually, the healing speed seemed even faster than Logan's and it seemed to be able to block pain? Even Logan felt pain when injured, but Apocalypse's expression remained calm, suggesting perhaps another ability was in effect. Hearing his words, those who were wondering if he would flee, and others, were all surprised. The Messiah seemed to have known about Apocalypse's self-healing ability all along? How is that possible? If the Messiah knew, why would he dare to challenge Apocalypse? At this moment, the wound on Apocalypse's body had completely healed. Aside from some tattered armor, no sign of injury remained. Suddenly, Eric and others saw Apocalypse frown slightly. Gazing at the Messiah, he pondered, a very unique attack. He paused and then said something that shocked Eric and others. Your attack, compared to the data I have seen, seems to be much stronger, whether it is speed, power, or size. End of chapter. Chapter 140. Chapter 140. Apocalypse found it unbelievable, unsure if he had misinterpreted something. As he spoke, Magneto and the others, along with the people watching through the drones sent by the Egyptian authorities, felt confused. What does he mean? Suddenly, under countless watchful eyes, Apocalypse launched an attack, controlling the swirling sand to strike at the Messiah. Syd frowned slightly and, in a flash, evaded the sand, rushing towards Apocalypse. The entire process took less than a second, and in the blink of an eye, Magneto and the others saw the Messiah appear beside Apocalypse. How is that possible? Instinctively, they thought they had seen things. Boom! A sonic boom followed. Those who recognized the sound were shocked, while those who didn't were bewildered. Divine finger experience +1. Crack, the sound of glass breaking, and the invisible shield in front of Apocalypse was impacted, sending him flying. Space shift experience +1. Syd's figure blurred, and in the blink of an eye, he appeared beside the airborne Apocalypse, raising his right hand. Black particle experience +1. Thud, the black particles pierced the invisible shield, going through Apocalypse. Blood splattered, leaving a gaping wound the size of a head. Syd adjusted his position slightly, preparing to release another black particle aimed at Apocalypse's head. Even if decapitation might not kill him, it should temporarily incapacitate him. However, before he could strike again, Apocalypse's eyes, filled with shock, suddenly focused on him, clearly having regained his senses. Almost instantly, a layer of sand rose from the ground, binding Syd's right hand, catching him off guard. The speed of this sand. Syd tried to break free, but the sand held firm. Despite his physical strength being several times that of a normal person, he couldn't break free? Apocalypse continued to be hurled backward, crashing into a nearby rubble wall, and then slowly stood up. His wounds were healing rapidly. However, his mind was not on himself but on the young man not far away. Not only him, but everyone's eyes were on Syd. As everything settled, they realized what had just happened. "Did you see Syd's speed just now?" Chris murmured. "I saw it. That was a sonic boom?" Magneto and the others found it hard to believe. This meant that the Messiah's flight speed had reached the speed of sound? But how was that possible? They had never heard or seen the Messiah move so fast. Even in the recent video of the Messiah dodging missiles, his speed was noticeably slower. How suddenly did his speed increase so dramatically, observable to the naked eye? Otto, in the crowd, asked in astonishment. Storm shivered slightly, suddenly saying, "Do you remember the discussions a while ago about who was stronger, the white-clad freak or the Messiah?" Her voice quickly spread to Magneto and the others and the countless people watching through the drones. One person suggested that initially, when the Messiah appeared before us, his strength was not this formidable. In the beginning, the Messiah seemed somewhat overwhelmed when facing 10 captors, but now, according to that person's theory, the Messiah's power has been rapidly increasing over time. Her words left Magneto, Eric, and the others in shock. They were aware of this, having watched and studied the Messiah's early videos compared to now. They did notice the Messiah's power seemed to grow over time, but they hadn't thought much of it, assuming the Messiah had been hiding his strength. If that person's theory was correct, and the Messiah's power was rapidly increasing, his potential was beyond words. "Impossible," Hank muttered. At Stark Tower. "Hey, what about science?" Tony Stark was dumbfounded, shaking his head in disbelief, trying to dispel the impossible thoughts from his mind. But the Messiah's current display of power, so different from before, suggested that this terrifying hypothesis might be true. And this hypothesis was expanding. If true, the Messiah could be far more terrifying than the white-clad freak. Tony Stark could only comfort himself that this was temporary and that the Messiah's display wasn't as fearsome. At S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury's face showed unprecedented shock and gravity. Is this real? He couldn't believe someone so terrifying existed in the world. Instinctively, he gripped the pager to call Captain Marvel and activated it. Among the audience watching the live feed, Phyllis, who had recently discussed who was stronger, the Messiah or the white-clad freak, was full of disbelief. After some time, the Messiah has really become stronger? Could that guy be right? As for the man of the theory, he was ecstatic. His theory had been proven true. The Messiah was no less powerful than the white-clad freak, possibly even more terrifying. On the battlefield, taking advantage of the fight between Apocalypse and the Messiah, Cyclops led his team to Professor X. Seeing them, Professor X felt conflicted. Just recently, Scott had reassured him not to worry too much, saying that the Messiah's power was already fearsome and that his growth rate couldn't be too fast. Such a powerful being with endless potential didn't exist. But now, Professor X murmured, "This child's power is already terrifying. If it continues to grow and becomes uncontrollable, if the Messiah fell into the wrong hands due to carelessness." The others felt a sense of dread. Countless viewers experienced intense emotional swings. Can Omega mutants really be dealt with? On the distant battlefield. Sunshine experience +1. Finding himself unable to break free from the sand, Syd's hand emitted a gentle gold-white light, unleashing a weakened version of Sunshine. Under countless gazes, the sand particles gradually vanished. Watching the Messiah float back into the sky, gazing at Apocalypse, Professor X and the others felt complicated and heavy-hearted. End of chapter. At this moment, not only were Charles and the others astonished, but Apocalypse, facing Syd directly, was equally amazed. In tens of thousands of years, he had never encountered a mutant with such incredible potential. Is this the true power of an Omega mutant? Even Apocalypse had to admit that if the Messiah could indeed grow stronger over time, he would be far more terrifying than the white-clad Omega mutant. Previously relaxed, Apocalypse now felt a mix of fear and desire. If he could seize the abilities of this Omega mutant, he might truly become a god. He then noticed the golden white light emanating from Syd. Molecular manipulation? Material decomposition? A terrifying power, Apocalypse solemnly remarked. Hearing his words, Syd frowned as he watched from afar. The next second, blue light shimmered in his hands. Spiritual power beam experience +1. A nearly 30-meter-long blue beam shot out, heading straight for Apocalypse, creating a spectacular scene. Boom! The spiritual power beam struck Apocalypse's invisible shield, causing the blue light to flare. However, facing the level 4 spiritual power beam, Apocalypse merely moved back slightly, his invisible shield remaining solid. It's like a turtle shell. Syd frowned. He couldn't determine if the shield was composed of telekinesis or something else. It was simply incredibly tough. Apart from the black particles, none of his other abilities seemed effective. Syd's mind raced through his other abilities. Soul extraction? He shook his head. With Apocalypse maintaining the invisible shield, he couldn't get close enough to use soul extraction. Even if the black particles pierced the shield, it would instantly regenerate. Syd suspected that even if he managed to grab Apocalypse's soul, it might not have any effect. Not only had soul extraction not reached level 4, but Apocalypse's soul and mind were also extremely powerful. Given that even Charles lost in a psychic battle against Apocalypse, his strength was evident. Just as he thought this, a powerful psychic force invaded his mind. Syd frowned slightly and instantly entered his mental world. Before him lay a vast yellow desert, with sandstorms raging. How did you get in here? Using Charles's abilities, or do you have your own psychic powers? Watching Apocalypse slowly approaching, Syd felt puzzled. Apocalypse's abilities were simply too enigmatic. Despite living for tens of thousands of years, the abilities displayed in the movies were limited. Of course, this might be because ancient mutants were rare, and it was only in modern times that mutants proliferated, leading Apocalypse to acquire mostly auxiliary abilities. Because of this, Syd was uncertain about the full extent of Apocalypse's powers. "Child, the abilities I possess are beyond your imagination," Apocalypse said. Syd frowned, realizing that in this mental world, he couldn't use his black particle abilities. Facing Apocalypse's incoming punch, he raised his right hand to block. "What is this?" Feeling the force transmitted through his hand, Syd realized he was being pushed back, taking a step back. In an instant, Syd understood something. In this mental world, one's physical strength was irrelevant. It was tied to mental and spiritual strength. Since his mental and spiritual strength were inferior to Apocalypse's, he was being pushed back. "Child, stop struggling and give up." Apocalypse punched repeatedly while persuading him to surrender. Facing Apocalypse's barrage of punches, Syd felt it was getting difficult and sensed that if this continued, he might lose, with dire consequences. At the critical moment, Syd noticed something. The next second, his eyes glowed red, his entire being radiating an eerie light. "Get out!" Boom! The chaotic magic energy exploded, red light flashing, and the chaotic magic, infused with psychic power, engulfed Apocalypse, pushing him out of the mental world. What kind of power is this? Apocalypse was stunned. Typically, abilities couldn't be used here. How was this child able to? Unless it was a power related to the mind or spirit. But when did the Messiah acquire psychic abilities? Apocalypse was puzzled. As he was blasted out of the mental world by the chaotic magic, he stared at the red light enveloping the entire mental world, feeling a sense of familiarity. Could it be? At that moment, his heart was filled with shock, unable to believe his thoughts. The next second, he was ejected from the mental world. Outside, both Syd and Apocalypse took a deep breath, snapping back to reality simultaneously. Those watching from a distance, including Eric and others, and the global audience through drones, noticed Apocalypse and the Messiah momentarily stunned before regaining their composure. They couldn't help but feel puzzled. They saw Apocalypse looking extremely shocked, staring at the Messiah as if he had seen something unimaginable. "You!" Staring at the Messiah, whose eyes faintly glowed red, Apocalypse wanted to say something. However, before he could speak, Syd activated his Omega ability. At that moment, he floated in the sky, exuding a peculiar aura. It was as if heaven and earth were one with him, as if all things were united with him, like a god or the embodiment of all things. His internal energy dropped to a minimum. In full release, a faint tattoo appeared on his chest. Instinctively, Syd mimicked Orochi's actions, pointing one hand to the sky and the other to the ground, symbolizing his supremacy over heaven and earth. From Eric and the others' perspective, they saw the sun hanging behind him. Combined with his current pose and aura, he appeared both divine and mysterious. In an instant, the sun overhead seemed to brighten, its rays gathering and shining down. The Messiah's body also began to radiate light. Sunshine experience +1. Run! Seeing this terrifyingly familiar scene, Eric and the others, about 100 meters away, were horrified and quickly started running. After running to a safe distance and confirming they hadn't turned to ash, they collectively sighed in relief. Still alive. Of course, if Syd hadn't focused on Apocalypse, running wouldn't have helped. They couldn't have escaped in time. In almost an instant, the light enveloped Apocalypse. Apocalypse was filled with shock, spreading his hands wide. The invisible shield formed around him, trying to block the light. Unfortunately, even though Sunshine was only level 3, its nature was far more potent than the level 4 black particles. If the black particles could break his defense, so could the light from Sunshine. End of chapter. Chapter 142. Chapter 142. Under the intense rays of sunshine, the invisible shield only lasted a few seconds before it was corroded and disintegrated. Exposed to the sunlight, Apocalypse's armor began to vanish inch by inch, his blue skin disintegrating to reveal the red flesh underneath. Sensing his impending end, Apocalypse looked at Syd floating in the sky, radiating light, and spoke. "Child, your talent and strength are astonishing, but this world cannot contain you." Whatever ability Apocalypse used, his voice spread far and wide, echoing in Syd's ears and also reaching Eric and the others 100 meters away. Finally, Apocalypse said, "Everything has already been decided." As he spoke, his flesh continued to disintegrate, revealing the bones beneath. Even though his flesh was healing, it couldn't keep up with the speed of Sunshine's disintegration, though he lasted much longer than an ordinary person would. Eventually, the flesh disappeared, and the bones began to vanish as well. As the light gradually faded, Apocalypse was gone, and where he stood, there was nothing left, as if he had never existed. The progenitor of mutants, Apocalypse, is dead? Watching from afar, Eric, Charles, and the others found it hard to believe. A foe so difficult to deal with was defeated just like that? Initially, they thought he would be an equal match for the Messiah. It seemed they had underestimated the Messiah's abilities. The Messiah's power seems to have become even more terrifying. This Omega ability is truly frightening. Scott and the others were in a daze. The people watching through the drones felt the same. Is the progenitor of mutants really dead? Apocalypse's defensive abilities seemed stronger than the Messiah's. He withstood so many attacks, yet he was still defeated by the Messiah's Omega ability? Many felt a growing fear and apprehension. Given the speculation about the Messiah's rapidly increasing power, they found him even more terrifying. Omega mutants are never simple. Initially, they thought the Messiah couldn't compare to the white-clad mutant. Now, they realized both Omega mutants were equally monstrous. If the speculation about the Messiah's power growth was true, who could defeat him over time? Syd didn't concern himself with their thoughts. He was focused on recovering his internal energy while floating in the air. If floating didn't consume almost no energy, he might have fallen to the ground. Defeating Apocalypse wasn't as simple as they thought. If it weren't for the significant increase in his internal energy recently, using all of it to enhance Sunshine, Apocalypse wouldn't have been so easily defeated. There was even a possibility that Apocalypse would have remained as a skeleton and then revived. The level of Sunshine is still too low. Apart from the Berserk state, there's a significant gap compared to the Phoenix Force. Syd pondered. Thinking of the Berserk state, he noticed that while fully unleashing Sunshine Blessing, something seemed to appear on his chest. Was it a tattoo? However, the tattoo was faint and unstable. Could it be that as my strength increases, I'll be able to transform? Syd recalled the time he went berserk. Indeed, that state was terrifying. However, he also felt that sunshine he used then wasn't complete, seemingly limited by its current level, and its full power wasn't unleashed. It seemed that Sunshine's ultimate state wasn't what it appeared to be now. Well, it will improve over time. Shaking his head, Syd stopped dwelling on the matter and recalled Apocalypse's last words. Everything has already been decided. He remembered Apocalypse's words when he died at Jean's hands. Everything has already been revealed. Back then, Apocalypse said that to himself after seeing Jean's nightmare from Charles's memories. Or rather, the premonition from the Phoenix Force. At that moment, he realized that the scene of the fire was the Phoenix Force's outbreak, showing his destruction. It indicated his inevitable fate, which couldn't be changed. Since Jean's whereabouts were unknown now, Charles hadn't glimpsed her nightmares, and Apocalypse hadn't seen the premonition. Therefore, when he said everything was already decided, it was directed at Syd. Everything has already been decided? I don't think so. Syd thought indifferently. Glancing at Eric and the others from afar, he looked at them for a moment before turning and flying away. It's a pity that Eric's abilities weren't activated by Apocalypse. Otherwise, he would have evolved into a true master of magnetic field control. Only after being activated by Apocalypse did Magneto become the true master of magnetism, with extraordinary capabilities. Due to the butterfly effect caused by Syd, Magneto remained the same as before. As Syd's figure disappeared, Charles and the others had complex expressions. Eric, I never thought the Messiah would come to save me. Was it you who called him? Charles sighed. Professor, you should ask Chris. He said the Messiah might come to save you. We didn't expect it to be true. Scott glanced at the burly Chris. Ah. Feeling the eyes on him, Chris was a bit embarrassed and unsure if he should explain the situation. As they discussed and Syd disappeared, far away in a sphinx, a mummified body floated in a blood pool. At that moment, Consciousness and the breath of life slowly began to revive within the corpse. Some time later, in the S.H.I.E.L.D. director's office, Nick Fury sat in his chair, staring at the video playing on his laptop, looking stunned. The screen showed the battle between Syd and Apocalypse, replaying it over and over. Just then, someone knocked and entered the office. "Didn't I say not to disturb me unless it's important?" Nick Fury looked up impatiently. Then he froze. "What's the matter?" a blonde woman asked, looking puzzled. "What are you watching?" It was none other than Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. End of chapter. Chapter 143. Chapter 143. H.I.E.L.D. You're finally back. Seeing Captain Marvel walk in, Nick Fury secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Because of the Messiah, he had activated the pager to call Captain Marvel some time ago. He had feared she might be delayed or take a long time to get back, but fortunately, none of that happened. Her speed in returning from space was still quite impressive. Carol Danvers scanned him with a glance. "Fury, this isn't like you. What could have made you so nervous?" She was very surprised, not knowing what could make Fury show such a relieved expression. "And what are you watching?" Her gaze shifted to the laptop that was continuously emitting sound. Her curiosity piqued. Nick sighed. "I can't help but be nervous. What I need to tell you is related to what you're about to see. Take a look." With that, he pushed the black laptop towards her, indicating she should watch. Carol looked at him curiously before focusing on the video. The footage showed Apocalypse destroying a city and his battle with Syd. Both displayed incredible abilities, but it was the scenes of the glowing young man that particularly astonished her. After watching it all, she asked seriously, "Who are these two, with such astonishing power? Are there really people this strong on Earth?" she wondered aloud. Nick pointed to the blue-skinned Apocalypse in the video. "This one is called Apocalypse, but he's dead now. You don't need to worry about him. It's this other one you need to focus on." He pointed to Syd in the video. "This young man is an Omega mutant." Nick then briefly explained Omega mutants and other related matters to her. The more Carol listened, the more shocked she became. How could such a terrifying individual have emerged on Earth in the short time she was away? Seeing she understood the situation, Nick couldn't help but ask, "So, do you think you can handle him?" "I'm not sure." Carol pondered. Although she said she wasn't sure, her tone did not reveal any fear, indicating she was not particularly worried. While Captain Marvel and Nick Fury were discussing, Syd was flying at supersonic speed back to the US from Egypt, glancing at his status panel with a frown. His eyes landed on his remaining lifespan. Age, 16, remaining lifespan, 81 days. What happened? Why has my lifespan decreased? Syd was filled with confusion. Logically, with the upgrade of his floating and flying abilities, the increase in his internal energy should mean his remaining lifespan would be at least 200 to 300 days. How could it be only 81? Instinctively, he used his mental powers to scan his body. With his senses extending inward, he detected some abnormal areas within himself. These areas glowed red, indicating danger and energy anomalies. These spots were likely where cancer cells resided, scattered throughout his body. In his mental scan, Syd noticed the cancer cells had undergone some changes, with a strange, eerie aura surrounding them. Delving deeper, he even heard some bizarre whispers. In an instant, his expression changed. He immediately withdrew his senses, his face growing more serious. Sensing these anomalies, Syd remembered something. No wonder the cancer never healed. He muttered to himself. He recalled that in Marvel, cancer was particularly special. Many heroes had suffered from it, and some had even died from it. Cancer was a cosmic-level illness, extremely difficult to cure. The reason for cancer's resilience seemed to be connected to the old gods, the elders of the old days. Syd pondered deeply. If I remember correctly, the old gods exist in Marvel. Even the Ancient One's true fate wasn't simply falling off a building but being killed by the elder god Shuma-Gorath. That would be a true end for the Ancient One, not just a trivial accident. And if an entity capable of killing the Ancient One existed, it was undoubtedly terrifying. Syd recalled that Shuma-Gorath had once dominated Earth during the Jurassic Era. In modern times, not only did it cause the death of the Ancient One, but Doctor Strange's demise was also related to it. Its creations had brought crises to the X-Men and fought multiple superheroes, including the Avengers. In Doctor Strange 2, there seemed to be an appearance of a similar entity, a giant eye and tentacles creature. It only threw cars around and was eventually killed by Doctor Strange. Of course, that must have been just an extension of Shuma-Gorath's power. As a Chaos Lord, it was far stronger than Dormammu and couldn't be that weak. cancer, being linked to these old gods, was influenced by their power. Syd strongly suspected that the changes in his cancer were related to these old gods. Perhaps his unique constitution attracted the attention of an old god from some dimension, causing the malignant transformation. Feeling his body gradually displaying abnormalities due to the cancer cells, Syd's expression turned grim. He even sensed the entity's intention to invade the real world through him. Marvel has all kinds of crazy stuff. Syd nearly cursed aloud. He even recalled that, in a parallel universe, there was a connection to the DC universe, with channels between them. It was absurd. He didn't know what to criticize anymore. And now he was suffering because of this. With a cold smile, Syd muttered, "Influence me, huh? Let's see if you can outpace my rate of improvement." He refused to believe that this entity's influence could surpass his growth rate. With that resolved, Syd focused on flying. Soon, he returned to his original city, skillfully avoiding the monitoring satellites overhead. Time passed quickly, and a few hours later, night fell. The sky was dark, with few stars visible, and the occasional chirping of insects could be heard from the bushes. Syd walked along the dimly lit, empty street, feeling the silence around him. Whether it was too late, around midnight, or because the area was remote, he didn't see a single person. Under a dim streetlight, there was a row of benches. Syd slowly walked over and sat down. End of chapter. Chapter 144. Chapter 144. As he pondered which ability to enhance next, the distant sound of an approaching vehicle broke his thoughts. An old, large bus emerged from the darkness. Syd frowned slightly, his eyes flashing with curiosity. Why did this bus feel strange to him? Or rather, wasn't it odd for a bus to appear in the middle of the night? As he considered this, the bus slowly came to a stop in front of him, conveniently at a bus stop. A faint mist had silently risen around the bus stop, making the already dimly lit area seem even darker. Syd focused his gaze on the peculiar bus. It was hard to see inside due to what seemed to be tinted windows. All he could see was darkness through the windows, revealing nothing about its interior or its passengers. The bus door clicked open, and Syd peered inside, noticing a driver dressed in a bus driver's uniform sitting at the wheel. However, the driver's face was hidden in shadows, making it difficult to see clearly, even with Syd's extraordinary vision. At that moment, a nervous middle-aged man's voice came from inside the bus. "Don't get on. Leave now. This bus is not safe for you." Syd, initially only curious and not intending to board, raised an eyebrow at the warning. Now he was intrigued. He felt a sudden urge to board the bus and see what was going on. As for the supposed danger, he dismissed it outright. After all, what kind of threat could an old bus possibly pose to him? With that thought, he got up and stepped towards the bus's open door. He walked up the steps and glanced around at the seats. First, he looked at the driver's seat. Now that he was closer, the shadows hiding the driver receded, revealing his features. The driver appeared to be in his 30s, with a pale, somber face. As for the other passengers, "Didn't I tell you not to get on? Why did you still come up?" The familiar middle-aged man's voice spoke again. Syd looked over to see a middle-aged white man in a suit sitting in the 5th row, appearing to be in his 40s, with a sturdy build and a rugged face. The man was frowning, looking at Syd as if he were crazy. Beside him sat a man and a woman, both frowning at Syd as well. Other than these people, Syd scanned the other seats but found them empty. The bus door behind him clicked shut, and the bus began to move. After a quick glance, Syd lost interest and casually walked to the back row, planning to sit there and observe what would happen. As he passed the 3 people, the middle-aged man who had spoken earlier sternly said, "You have no idea where this place is, yet you still dared to get on?" The man, feeling a bit helpless, looked at Syd, who was dressed in black, wearing a black mask and sunglasses. As a SHIELD agent, he and his 2 colleagues had been sent to investigate a series of disappearances in this area. According to the records, every few days, 1 or 2 people would vanish mysteriously from this street, totaling over a dozen disappearances so far. Witnesses claimed that one of the missing individuals was last seen boarding a strange bus. Similar incidents were documented in SHIELD secret files. Trains vanishing mysteriously, only to reappear later with all passengers missing, and planes experiencing similar occurrences. Thus, SHIELD suspected this latest series of disappearances was another such mysterious event. So, they had been dispatched to investigate. However, they hadn't expected to see a random person boarding the strange bus shortly after they found it. The 3 agents were exasperated. This random person, likely like the other missing individuals, had foolishly boarded the bus, leading to their disappearance. The bus clearly looked suspicious, yet someone dared to board it in the middle of the night? Couldn't they think twice about the oddity? They could already envision this young person becoming another victim of a mysterious incident. Syd ignored them and made his way to the last row, ready to watch how things would unfold. Seeing his dismissive attitude, the three agents were even more exasperated. Was this person so arrogant? Kid, I'm not joking. This bus is dangerous. You shouldn't have gotten on. The man warned sternly, when it stops, get off immediately, or you might not survive. Despite the warning, the young person dressed in black, who appeared quite young, showed no reaction and simply ignored him. The woman with long auburn hair, sitting beside the man, pulled on his arm and said indifferently, Jilu, forget it. If he wants to die, let him. Jilu frowned, feeling a bit annoyed. This young man was both arrogant and dismissive, ignoring their warnings completely. Forget it, if he wants to die, there's nothing we can do. Shaking his head, he decided not to bother anymore. After a while, the bus seemed to be slowing down to a stop. Syd turned to look out the window. What was once a foggy scene, with nothing visible, gradually became clearer. An old bus stop appeared. Vaguely, he could see a few passengers waiting for the bus. As the first passenger boarded, Syd frowned slightly. The newcomer was dressed in black, tall and thin, and looked somewhat peculiar. His figure seemed a bit ethereal. Upon boarding, the man scanned the bus and fixed his gaze on them. Sniffing the air, his eyes showed a mixture of suspicion and greed. Living people? His gaze swept over the four of them. Jilu and his colleagues felt a chill. A ghost. This is a ghost bus? In an instant, they felt a cold realization, understanding how those people had disappeared. As they nervously pondered solutions, the black-clad man's gaze moved past them with slight apprehension and focused behind them. Immediately, his eyes lit up with excitement. The next moment, he drifted towards the back row. Oh no! Jilu and his colleagues exchanged worried glances. Although they had previously thought the young man was seeking death, seeing someone about to die in front of them still made them want to help. If they didn't act, this young man was as good as dead. End of chapter. Chapter 145. Chapter 145. Watching the black-clad ghost drift towards the young man, Jilu and his two companions grew anxious. They exchanged glances, frantically thinking of a way to save the young man. Despite their earlier disdain, they didn't want to see someone die in front of them. Plus, they weren't sure if they would be next once the young man was gone. As they rummaged through their gear, ready to pull out some high-tech weapons, the ghost hovering in front of the young man sniffed the air greedily and asked, "You're alive, right? Right?" The ghost's voice grew sharp with the last word. Jilu and his team felt a chill run down their spines, silently praying the young man wouldn't respond. From their years of experience, they knew answering would spell trouble, possibly death for the young man. Unfortunately, at this crucial moment, they couldn't speak up, only shake their heads and make hand signals behind the ghost's back. To make matters worse, 3 more ghosts, 2 men and an old woman, had boarded the bus, silencing the agents further. All they could do was hope the young man would be wise enough not to react recklessly. But then, they heard the young man's voice. "Yes, I am alive," Syd replied, eyeing the ghost with a strange expression. The male ghost was momentarily stunned, then broke into a greedy smile, just like the 3 other ghosts who had just boarded. Their eyes gleamed with hunger. "You're mine," the male ghost shrieked, lunging at Syd as if afraid his companions might snatch the prize away. Jilu and his companions were horrified, almost too afraid to watch what would happen next. Just when they thought the young man was doomed, a bright light suddenly shone. In the eyes of Jilu, his companions, and the ghosts, the male ghost dissolved like snow in sunlight the moment he touched the light. In the blink of an eye, the greedy ghost vanished under the light. The 3 remaining ghosts looked bewildered, while Jilu and his companions were equally stunned. What just happened? Wasn't the young man supposed to scream and die at the ghost's hands? How did this? The female agent suddenly realized something, her face turning pale with shock. "Are you Messiah?" Her words made Jilu and the other man gasp. "What? Messiah?" They looked closely at the young man, and indeed, he looked more familiar the longer they stared. And that terrifying light. Fear gripped their hearts as they exchanged glances, each seeing their own terror reflected back. Jilu let out a bitter laugh. He had thought the young man was finished just moments ago. What a joke. Even if they died, the Messiah probably wouldn't, right? So, the young man wasn't arrogant or dismissive earlier. In fact, it seemed entirely fitting, and they felt no sense of incongruity at all. While their thoughts raced, the 3 remaining ghosts recoiled in fear, one of them screaming in terror. To an outsider, it might have looked like Syd was the ghost and they were the victims. The old woman ghost spoke sharply. "Who are you, an exorcist? You're done for." You killed a passenger on this ghost bus. The bus and the driver won't let you go. As if to confirm her words, the bus began to glow green, the interior becoming oppressively dark and sinister. A cold energy swept towards Syd, who was sitting in the last row, and the driver at the front of the bus shakily stood up. Seeing this, Jilu and his companions' faces fell, while the ghosts smirked with anticipation. They hoped to feast on the young man's flesh and soul after he was killed by the bus and its driver. Their greedy smiles widened. As they envisioned their feast, a blue light flashed. Boom! The next second, the ghost bus split in half, and the eerie, sinister atmosphere dissipated. The ghost driver froze, and the smug, expectant ghosts went rigid with shock. What just happened? The old woman stammered, her face blank with disbelief. Is he human, or are we human? The other ghosts and the driver were equally stunned. The bus wobbled, tilting to one side. Jilu and his companions clung to their seats, alarmed. Syd floated in the air, simply releasing his internal light energy. Like the sun itself, the light enveloped the ghostly bus. The next second, oh! Screams echoed. The ghosts' eyes widened in terror as their bodies disintegrated like snow under the sunlight. Not only did the ghosts vanish, but the entire bus began to dissipate into green vapors under the light. No, spare us, sir. We didn't know you were such a noble being. Please spare us. The ghosts begged for mercy, but received no response. Within seconds, they and the bus disappeared in the sunlight. Jilu and his team, sprawled on the road, stared blankly around them, shivering as they looked at the floating Messiah. The Messiah's power was indeed as terrifying as ever. Glancing at them briefly, Syd scanned the area from above. Something felt off about the surroundings, especially the old bus stop not far away. This place couldn't possibly exist in reality. It was too old and eerie, like something from a past century. He suspected this was not the real world, or it was cloaked in an illusion. An idea for a solution struck him instantly. Using sunshine or simply releasing his internal light energy, he chose the latter. This creepy place didn't warrant using sunshine. He ascended a bit higher. The next second, he unleashed his internal light energy. An endless flood of sunlight illuminated the eerie area. It was like a sun had descended and hung in the sky. End of chapter. Chapter 146. Chapter 146. Ah! Countless buildings dissolved, and faint screams echoed continuously. Soon, the gloomy buildings around began to fade, gradually revealing the real-world environment. At that moment, a roar came from a distance, seemingly from the master of this eerie realm. Seeing a black shadow flying towards him, Syd instinctively swung out a beam of spiritual energy. A flash of blue light, and the shadow vanished instantly, as if it had never existed. Syd was momentarily stunned, not quite comprehending what had just happened. Was that it? Was this a joke? That was way too weak, wasn't it? He was a bit puzzled. If that shadow had known his thoughts, it would undoubtedly have roared in anger, accusing him of not realizing his own strength, and not knowing how powerful he truly was, thinking everyone else was just as monstrous. At this point, the illusory surroundings completely disappeared, and Syd found himself back in reality. Gradually retracting his released light energy, he glanced at the distant Jilu and his two companions before flying away, contemplating what ability to practice next. Seeing the sun in the sky disappear and leave, the three S.H.I.E.L.D. agents sighed in relief. Let's report this to Director Fury, Jilu said, looking at his teammates. Jeff and Isabella nodded, starting to contact S.H.I.E.L.D. and truthfully report what had happened. As they left, the area returned to silence, occasionally visited by people checking out what had happened. Not long ago, the nearby residents had seen a second sun in the sky. Some even thought it was the sun god descending and had uttered a few prayers. 4 kilometers away, flying through the quiet night sky, Syd vaguely heard a voice praying. However, the sound was so faint that it was almost non-existent. By the time he tried to investigate, it had vanished. Shaking his head, he temporarily ignored the voice. He pondered on what to upgrade next. As he thought about it, his attention naturally fell on sunshine. After upgrading to level 3, it hadn't improved for quite a while. By now, it was starting to feel a bit inadequate. Syd recalled the scene of using sunshine against Apocalypse not long ago. Compared to the Phoenix Force, Sunshine's power was still significantly weaker. At least in terms of performance, the Phoenix Force dealt with Apocalypse much faster, and he had less resistance. First, upgrade Sunshine, then try to unlock the light of God Baldur's divine light power. Time passed quickly, and soon the sky brightened as the sun rose on the horizon. Sunshine experience +1. Sunshine experience +1. Bathed in the morning light, Syd practiced Sunshine. Soon, a whole day had passed, and Sunshine's progress had changed. Ability: Sunshine, 83/1000, Level 3. Too slow. Grumbling about the slow progress of Sunshine, he continued practicing. 7 days passed. As he silently trained Sunshine and avoided pursuers, a familiar prayer reached his ears. Syd was startled, following the sense to locate Caecilius. "What is it?" he asked. A profound Sanskrit voice echoed in the Reverend Caecilius' mind. In the next moment, Caecilius replied, "Great One, according to our intelligence, the Tesseract has returned to S.H.I.E.L.D. Do you need me to retrieve it for you?" Hearing this, Syd frowned slightly. The Tesseract was supposed to be in the hands of the Ancient One. How could it end up back at S.H.I.E.L.D.? He didn't believe that anyone at S.H.I.E.L.D. could snatch the Tesseract from the Ancient One. In fact, they might not even know it was in the Ancient One's possession. Thinking for a moment, he considered one possibility. Since it couldn't have been taken by S.H.I.E.L.D., there was only one possibility left. The Ancient One had returned it to S.H.I.E.L.D. Is it to prevent significant changes? Shaking his head, Syd thought this was indeed something the Ancient One would do. After all, she had peered into countless timelines, knowing what actions would be beneficial and which would be detrimental. Clearly, in her view, returning the Tesseract to S.H.I.E.L.D., which would lead to the Chitauri invasion of Earth, was ultimately favorable for the planet. She believed that altering this event might make things worse. At this moment, Caecilius, thinking Syd hadn't heard him, repeated his question. "Great One, should I retrieve the Tesseract for you?" After contemplating for a moment, Syd's profound Sanskrit voice replied, "No, the Earth must face its destiny. Arbitrarily changing it would not be wise." Hearing the mystical voice in his mind, Caecilius was left in a daze. Destiny of the Earth? Does this mean something significant is going to happen? Has the Great One foreseen something? These thoughts made Caecilius tremble with awe, becoming even more respectful and devoted. The Great One indeed. As for whether something would actually happen, it would be verified later. If something did occur, it would mean that the Great One's power was beyond comprehension. Had Syd known what Caecilius was thinking, he would have been speechless, marveling at his ability to fill in the gaps. What he had said was merely a casual remark to brush him off. The reason he didn't want to retrieve the Tesseract was simple. He was waiting for bigger opportunities. If he took the Tesseract, the Chitauri wouldn't invade, and Loki wouldn't appear. Where would he then get the Mind Scepter? By waiting, Loki would naturally bring the scepter to Earth. And the gem in the scepter was one of the Infinity Stones, the Mind Stone. Loki probably didn't even realize that the tip of his scepter housed an Infinity Stone, did he? Besides the Mind Stone, taking the Tesseract could prevent the Reality Stone from appearing. Such a move could set off a chain reaction, disrupting future events, which Syd wanted to avoid. He instructed Caecilius to notify him if there were any significant changes at S.H.I.E.L.D., then ended the connection. The Chitauri should be invading soon, which means the plot of the Avengers is about to begin. Stroking his chin, Syd's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Loki, don't disappoint me." With that thought, his attention returned to Sunshine. Ability: Sunshine, 575/1000, Level 3. Almost there. With eager anticipation, Syd continued practicing Sunshine. Time flew by, and soon another 6 days had passed. Originally, there should have been 3 updates today. A bunch of stuff to deal with, really not intentional, apologizing to everyone, we'll try to make up for it tomorrow. End of chapter. Chapter 147. Chapter 147. Check out my new translation. Naruto, Infinite New World. Just before noon, a notification echoed in Syd's ears. Sunshine Experience +1. Ability: Sunshine, 0/2000, Level 4. With the appearance of the notification, Syd immediately felt changes in his body. A warm current spread throughout his body, his cells becoming increasingly complex and mysterious, filled with more energy. The Venom symbiote, which had been dormant in his right hand, was instantly awakened by the surge of energy, sensing the threat and quickly transformed into a black liquid, crawling out from his right hand. "Syd, what's happening to you again?" Why did I say again?" Venom formed a black head and looked at Syd, whose entire body was faintly glowing, unsure of what to say. How many times was this now? Every so often, it seemed, Syd would undergo this kind of transformation. Syd ignored Venom, focusing on the changes happening within his body. Apart from his internal light energy becoming more refined and his storage capacity increasing, he found that his control over sunlight seemed to have become easier. How far can I control sunlight with level 4 sunshine? Syd wondered, eager to test it out. Sunshine experience +1. The next second, his internal light energy sharply decreased. With a single thought, an astonishing phenomenon occurred. All the sunlight within sight twisted. The affected range was far greater than when sunshine was at level 3. After some calculations, Syd arrived at a startling conclusion. Nearly 1 kilometer of sunlight was twisted. The range of level 4 sunshine is that vast? This leap in power left Syd astonished. At level 3, even with the boost from his internal light energy, sunshine's range was just over 100 meters. Now, how many times had it increased? Covering nearly 1 kilometer, even a normal person would have to take about 1,500 steps to exit this range. He could hardly imagine the destruction this would cause if unleashed in a city. After understanding the range, Syd cancelled sunshine, and the sharp decrease in his internal light energy stabilized. What about the specific power increase? Knowing the approximate range, Syd was curious about the decomposition speed of level 4 sunshine. Unfortunately, sunshine couldn't be casually used, so he couldn't directly observe the full effect. At that moment, an idea struck Syd. I wonder how sunshine compares to the Phoenix Force now? After contemplating for a while, he thought that while it might not surpass the Phoenix Force, it should be able to compete with it to some extent. With this thought, Syd considered another question. What about level 5? What changes will sunshine undergo at level 5? He had a hunch that reaching level 5 would bring unprecedented changes to sunshine, distinct from previous levels. He was eager to reach level 5 sunshine and see the effects. Having studied the changes in sunshine, Syd focused on his unlocking progress, glancing at the panel. Unlock progress. 44%. 44%. But how much is needed to unlock the divine light power? 45%. 50%. 60%? Syd pondered. Only when the divine power truly awakens can he be considered part of the divine race, like Thor before unlocking his power, who is just a hammer god, a physically strong alien. The difference between the two was enormous. Syd was eager to collect energy points, but his internal light energy was currently depleted and needed to be replenished after the extensive use of sunshine. As the sun gradually set, his internal light energy rapidly recovered. Photon energy +1. With the notification, Syd's internal light energy was fully restored. At that moment, he noticed a significant increase in his light energy. If using regular level 4 abilities, he could now perform nearly 200 times. Syd shook his head, feeling exasperated. This mana pool is still too sparse. Level 4 black particle could only be used nearly 200 times before he'd be drained, which seemed a bit underwhelming. Photon energy +1. Photon energy +1. Syd continued gathering energy points, preparing to increase his unlocking progress while walking down a deserted street. In his spare time, he glanced at the lifespan section on his panel. Age, 16, remaining lifespan, 88 days. Last time he checked, his remaining lifespan was 81 days. This meant that reaching level 4 sunshine only added 7 days to his life? No, considering the time spent leveling up, it meant that level 4 sunshine only increased his lifespan by about 20 days. Syd frowned slightly, finding this cancer rather troublesome. As he pondered, he suddenly heard sounds in the distance. Faintly, he heard several people shouting. Run, Dario, leave me. No way. Hearing these shouts, Syd grew curious. More thugs robbing people? In recent times, he had witnessed numerous incidents of street robberies, confirming the chaotic reputation of America where gunfights seemed a daily occurrence. Of course, it might also be due to his frequent walks in remote, chaotic areas, but it didn't change Syd's perception of the mess and danger in America. Thinking it over, he decided to check out the commotion. As for intervening to save people, he mentally apologized, saying there was no such service, and he was merely bored and wanted to watch. Moreover, there were plenty of superheroes around to help, like a certain web-slinging guy. Approaching the scene, Syd emerged from the alley and looked towards the source of the noise. He saw 2 young men running frantically down the street. Chasing them was a large black robot, with a crowd of onlookers pointing and gesturing. The pursuing robot looked familiar to Syd. Is that a Sentinel? Syd was taken aback, immediately frowning. How long had it been, and the government had already produced another batch of Sentinels, and they were still deploying them to hunt and capture mutants. Without a doubt, those 2 young men must be mutants. Syd took a closer look at the 2 young men. Just one glance, and he was momentarily stunned. One was dressed in black, the other in white, both with masks and disguises covering their faces. Recognizing their familiar outfits, Syd couldn't help but twitch a bit. End of chapter. Chapter 148. Chapter 148. Check out my new translation. Naruto, Infinite New World. Their outfits were so familiar that Syd didn't even know what to say. The guy in black was dressed almost exactly like him at the moment, while the one in white was nearly identical to his other persona. Is it a trend now to dress like me? Syd muttered to himself in exasperation. At that moment, the two young men in their 20s who were running away noticed the person dressed similarly to them. Friend, run. It's a Sentinel robot. With just a glance, Dario and Fair recognized who the distant figure was supposed to be. Apparently, it was another person cosplaying as Messiah, just like them. If there was one person who had become the most popular in recent times, it was undoubtedly Messiah and White Knight, the two Omega mutants. Countless mutants, including the two of them, idolized and admired these figures. Because of this, the attire of Messiah and White Knight had become immensely popular. At some point, people started appearing on the streets dressed as Messiah and White Knight. At first, some citizens were frightened and reported sightings of Messiah. When government officials investigated, they discovered it was a false alarm. The person cosplaying as Messiah was just an ordinary citizen. Indeed, even ordinary people, and not a small number of them, were dressing up as Messiah, with many of them being children. Due to these ordinary cosplayers, government officials were overwhelmed and eventually chose to ignore such reports. This emboldened Dario and Fair to wear the Messiah and White Knight costumes outside. However, they hadn't expected the government to deploy Sentinel robots so soon to hunt them down. Hence, the current scene, the two of them fleeing while a Sentinel robot chased after them. At that moment, seeing the person dressed exactly like them, Dario and Fair didn't need to think. They knew it was another cosplayer. If it were an ordinary person, it wouldn't be an issue, but if it were a mutant. So they shouted out a warning, hoping the cosplayer would be cautious and, if they were a mutant, smart enough to escape quickly. But just moments after they shouted, their hearts sank as the worst-case scenario unfolded. The Sentinel robot chasing them paused and turned to look at the person dressed as Messiah. In an instant, Dario and Fair deduced what had happened. Clearly, the Sentinel had detected another mutant. Because the Sentinel robot did not react to ordinary people, it wouldn't have stopped to observe unless it detected a mutant. If it did react to ordinary people, the group of spectators who had been following and watching from a distance wouldn't still be there so calmly. Friend, run. Dario, cosplaying Messiah, shouted. After shouting, he immediately turned and charged at the Sentinel, intending to distract it and give the other person time to escape. Sensing him approaching, the Sentinel's yellow eyes focused on him. The next second, its head opened, firing a laser beam at him. However, although the laser beam hit Dario, it passed right through him. Boom! The laser beam struck the ground, sending fragments flying. Watching from the side, Fair breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, luckily, Dario's phasing ability still works. If not for Dario's ability to phase through all matter and energy, unaffected by the Sentinel robot's powers, they might have already been caught by now. That's why Fair had shouted earlier for Dario to run and leave him behind, as Dario's ability made him almost untouchable by the Sentinel. Seeing the laser beam ineffective, the Sentinel ignored Dario, turning its attention to Fair and Syd. Scanning Fair, who was standing close to Dario, the Sentinel's logic processed quickly before it focused on Syd. The next second, it charged forward. Oh no! Dario and Fair's hearts sank. Don't just stand there, run. Seeing the cosplaying Messiah standing motionless, Dario and Fair grew anxious. They wanted to stop the Sentinel, but lacking the ability to do so, they could only watch as the robot advanced, bracing themselves for a tragic scene. For a moment, regret filled their eyes. They shouldn't have led the Sentinel here. This way, their fellow mutant, who was cosplaying Messiah, wouldn't face such a tragic end. Meanwhile, the distant crowd of spectators held their breath, anxiously awaiting the next moment. Just as they were discussing how many moves the cosplaying Messiah could withstand, a dazzling blue light flashed. Spirit Power Beam Experience +1. In everyone's eyes, the Sentinel robot froze mid-action, unable to transform before being sliced in half. With a crash, the Sentinel fell to the ground in two pieces, completely deactivated. Dario, Fair, and the distant onlookers were all stunned. The Sentinel robot was gone just like that? Wasn't it supposed to overpower and crush the cosplayer? What just happened? That blue beam. At that moment, Dario and Fair exchanged glances, their faces filled with shock. Messiah. Are you really Messiah? They couldn't believe it. They had encountered the real Messiah. Simultaneously, a wave of embarrassment washed over them. Looking at their own outfits and then at the real Messiah's attire not far away, they felt awkward and didn't know what to say. At the same time, admiration shone in their eyes. Messiah is indeed powerful. The Sentinel robot was like a toy, truly worthy of being an Omega mutant. While they were feeling embarrassed, delighted, and admiring, the distant spectators' expressions froze. Clearly, after a brief moment of confusion and shock, they also recognized what that blue light meant. Me Messiah? My God, it's really him? They couldn't believe it either. They had encountered the real one. End of chapter. Chapter 149. Chapter 149 inches everyone's mind. Messiah was synonymous with terror. Just a moment ago, they had been hoping to see Messiah beaten by the Sentinel robot, but clearly, that was never going to happen. The ordinary people were frightened. Some began to quietly move away, hoping to escape. Syd didn't care what the ordinary people thought. He glanced at the two young men dressed like him, shook his head in exasperation, and then turned and left. Watching his figure gradually disappear, Dario and Fair wanted to say something to make him stay, but they didn't know how to start, fearing they might offend him. In the end, they could only hold on to their excitement, watching their idol's figure vanish from their sight. Hey Fair, we can brag about meeting Messiah and being saved by him for months, Dario said, both excited and enthusiastic. Fair, equally thrilled, nodded in agreement. They never expected that in a moment of danger, they would encounter their idol, Messiah, and even be saved by him. In their excitement, they quickly uploaded this incident to their social media, including a photo of the destroyed Sentinel robot as proof. When they posted it on a community dedicated to better cosplaying Messiah, they received a flood of comments filled with doubt, jealousy, and envy, which delighted them. While the two were reveling in their joy, Syd, who had left, was now frowning. Sentinel robots again. He felt troubled and regretted not killing the mastermind behind the Sentinel robots. If he had, there wouldn't be so many problems now. As for where the mastermind was hiding at the moment, he really had no clue. Otherwise, he would fly over and blast them with a spirit power beam. As the sun set, Syd flew through the city, scanning for any signs of Sentinel robots or suspicious bases. Although he couldn't directly kill the mastermind, he could still destroy some Sentinel robots to vex them. They used Sentinel robots to vex him, so he would destroy their Sentinel robots to vex them back. The cost of making Sentinel robots couldn't be negligible. He only needed to expend a little energy to destroy one, making it a very cost-effective endeavor. Thus, he began cruising around the city at supersonic speed. Boom! A loud explosion occurred just 10 meters above the city, drawing everyone's attention. Oh my God! Pedestrians on their way home from work, eating, or shopping were all left with their mouths agape. Countless people looked up to see a dark figure moving rapidly across the city sky. As it passed by, there was not only a deafening roar but also a sonic boom cloud, making it seem as though a cloud was circling around it. Many pedestrians screamed, raising their hands to shield themselves from the sweeping wind. What is that? Is that a sonic boom? Was someone flying up there just now? This is insane. It's one thing to fly, but flying at supersonic speeds, that's just beyond belief. What kind of freak is this? Watching the black figure in the distance, the Americans, who had been almost desensitized by repeated freakish events, were still shocked, with many showing signs of fear. This was supersonic speed, complete with a sonic boom cloud. If this person crashed into someone, it would be like turning them into a mist of blood, with no remains left. Or flying at supersonic speeds through the streets, they would leave a trail of blood. Just as they were thinking that, after the recent appearances of the Hulk and Apocalypse, there was now another freak. Someone hesitantly recognized who it was. Could that have been Messiah just now? Messiah. Pedestrians on the street were stunned, quickly recalling, and the more they thought about it, the more it seemed like it really was Messiah. And Messiah was known for his ability to fly at supersonic speeds. During his battle with Apocalypse, countless people had heard the sonic boom around him, indicating his speed had reached or exceeded the speed of sound, though they weren't sure exactly how fast. Oh, it was Messiah. That makes sense. Countless pedestrians breathed a sigh of relief. Messiah was a super freak, and supersonic flight was entirely normal for him. They didn't find it strange at all. But if it were someone else, they wouldn't be able to accept it. What is Messiah doing? Wherever Syd passed, pedestrians wondered, not understanding why Messiah was flying so conspicuously. Soon, the police and other departments received numerous reports claiming to have spotted Messiah. Unfortunately, although he was spotted, these departments couldn't do much about it at the moment. After all, Messiah was no small figure and couldn't be dealt with easily, especially not in a city. They were at a loss for a solution in the short term. For now, they could only helplessly watch Messiah fly around the city. It didn't take long for everyone to understand why Messiah was flying around the city. Because wherever a Sentinel robot appeared, Messiah would stop his supersonic flight, release a blue beam, and in the blink of an eye, destroy the Sentinel attacking people. Even if the Sentinel tried to change its form, the Level 4 black particle would easily dispatch it. The government departments responsible for the Sentinels were furious, but there was nothing they could do. They could only watch as Messiah slaughtered the Sentinels. Witnessing Messiah fly away, many of the indirectly saved mutants felt both excited and awed. Sentinel robots were being destroyed one after another. Eventually, the American government departments gave up and stopped deploying Sentinels in this city. They realized that without thousands of Sentinels, they had no chance of threatening Messiah. A few, 10, or even 100 Sentinels were just fodder for him. After flying around the city at supersonic speeds without encountering more Sentinels, Syd reluctantly ended his hunt. By now, the sky had darkened, and the sun had completely set. Seeing this, Syd found a secluded, abandoned factory and moved in. Landing, he didn't concern himself with anything else but looked at his panel. Energy points. 2,466. Although he had been hunting Sentinel robots, flying nearly costlessly, he had still managed to accumulate some energy points from occasional efforts over the past few days. After a quick glance, Syd immediately allocated all his energy points to the unlocking progress of Baldur's Divine Power of Light. Unlock progress 44%. In the blink of an eye, the progress had changed significantly. Unlock progress 49%. Seeing the 49% progress and not hearing a prompt, Syd's brows furrowed. With a resigned expression, he hoped that something would change at 50%. However, that would have to wait until tomorrow. As the moonlight shone down, Syd, bored, gradually fell asleep. Occasionally, faint prompts appeared. Photon energy +1. Soon, the next morning arrived, and the first light of dawn hit him, waking him up instantly. A moment later, when the energy points reached 700, Syd added them all to the unlocking progress. The next second, to Syd's surprise, a prompt sounded. Unlock progress 50%. Ability, Divine Power of Light, unlocked. Ability, Divine Power of Light, 0/100, Level 1. At that moment, a dramatic change occurred in his body. His entire skin began to glow, and Venom, startled, immediately slithered out of his right hand. Venom, with a stunned expression, watched as Syd's entire body radiated a brilliant light, turning him into a large glowing orb, like a miniature sun, emitting a warm, radiant glow. Under this light, Venom inexplicably felt its mood becoming serene and filled with joy, as if all negative emotions had vanished, replaced by positive feelings. Hey, what's happening to me? This is crazy, Venom exclaimed in shock. While Venom was bewildered and astonished by the changes occurring in Syd, inside, Syd was undergoing a significant transformation. In his perception, a strange energy was merging with the light energy, the two becoming one. The light energy underwent dramatic changes, becoming more refined, more concentrated, and imbued with a mystical, divine quality. As the divine power of light awakened, an even more intense change occurred, not just within him but also in the outside world. What's going on? As she approached the city where Messiah was located, Captain Marvel halted her flight, looking up at the sky. Not just her, countless others also looked up at the sky at that moment. Inexplicably, the sky had begun to shine brightly. While it was odd, the sky was indeed glowing, even during the day, and the light was clearly visible. In the Western Hemisphere, this might not be as noticeable, but in the Eastern Hemisphere, it was incredibly conspicuous. At this moment, in the Eastern Hemisphere, specifically in Japan, where it was night, the sky lit up as if it were day. Countless people were roused from their sleep, stunned by the light pouring through their windows. Moving to their windows, they either opened them or simply looked outside. Pedestrians on the street also stopped, astonished, looking up at the sky. The previously dark night sky was now bright as day, as if it were daytime. Many were confused, thinking it was day instead of night, and checking their watches and phones to confirm the time. No matter how they checked, it was indeed night, but the sky was impossibly bright, as if it were day. Holy crap, it's night, right? It's night? My God, what's going on? Is it the end of the world? People in the Eastern Hemisphere were stunned, unable to comprehend how night had turned into day. Especially after searching the internet, they were even more shocked. According to the information they found, it wasn't just their region or city that had turned into day. The entire Eastern Hemisphere was experiencing this phenomenon. Even in the Western Hemisphere, under the sun's light, the entire world was bathed in this radiant glow, without exception. Not only were ordinary people astonished, but governments worldwide were also shocked and confused, trying to understand what major event had occurred. More importantly, under this strange light, countless people felt a sense of inner peace. A profound joy arose in their hearts as if they had encountered something immensely pleasing. Even those suffering from depression felt joyful emotions, unknowingly cured of their condition. This inexplicable joy left many bewildered, unable to understand what was happening. Vatican City. Gazing at the radiant sky, the white-haired Pope, surrounded by priests, looked up in reverence and longing. "Lord, is it you? Is this a sign of your presence?" Such a sudden light made countless religious believers instinctively believe it was a divine miracle. "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." At that moment, many believers and priests began to pray, hoping their God would hear their prayers and bless them. While governments around the world scrambled to investigate, they were unaware that this sudden daylight was not limited to Earth but had also illuminated the 9 realms simultaneously. Jotunheim, the realm of the frost giants. In the dark, frost-laden realm of the frost giants, light suddenly filled the entire realm. The entire realm was bathed in light, warmth touching every frost giant. The frost giants stood in stunned silence, looking up at the sky in disbelief. A sense of joy filled their hearts, with some even shedding tears. This phenomenon was not limited to Jotunheim. Asgard, the realm of the gods. Unbeknownst to anyone, a strange light had enveloped the entire sky of Asgard. "Father, what is happening?" Thor, the god of thunder, looked up in surprise at the sky, turning to ask his father, Odin. He, too, felt a sudden joy deep within, adding to his confusion. Beside him, Odin, the Allfather, looked at the light-filled sky of Asgard, his brows gradually furrowing. End of chapter. Chapter 150. Chapter 150. 500 PS reached. Next goal, 1000 PS. Odin furrowed his brow. Such a phenomenon had never appeared in Asgard, not even in the future visions he had foreseen. He couldn't be sure if this was related to Ragnarok or how it might impact it. Moreover, he had a strange feeling that the light contained traces of the divine power unique to the Asgardian gods. Odin was both puzzled and suspicious. At this moment, it wasn't just the two of them. Many Asgardians, including Queen Frigga, also saw the extraordinary scene in the sky and looked up in astonishment. "What is this? So warm, it fills my heart with joy." The Asgardians were all taken aback, amazed by this sudden phenomenon. In the distance, at the entrance of a palace, Queen Frigga, with her golden hair and elegant attire exuding grace and nobility, reached out her hand to catch the light. She couldn't explain it, but a woman's intuition told her that this light was somehow related to her, and the connection felt very intimate, leaving her puzzled. Driven by her intuition, Frigga walked towards where Odin was, determined to find out what was happening. Soon, the Asgardians, including Thor, were even more shocked. Upon investigating, they learned that this phenomenon wasn't limited to Asgard. It had also appeared in Jotunheim, Midgard, Earth, Niflheim, and all the other 9 realms. At the former site of the Bifrost, Heimdall, clad in golden armor, stood with his hands resting on the hilt of his golden sword, his golden eyes quietly observing the 9 realms. "Heimdall, what's going on? Have you found the cause of this phenomenon?" Thor strode over, puzzled, and questioned Heimdall. Heimdall's golden eyes turned towards Thor, his deep voice resonating. "I'm not sure. I haven't seen what caused all this, but I suggest you take a trip to Midgard." "Why do you say that?" Thor scratched his head, a bit frustrated by Heimdall's cryptic words. Fortunately, Heimdall continued, the phenomenon first appeared in Midgard before spreading to the other realms. This event is likely related to Midgard. You should investigate there. Thor, understanding now, still found it strange that Heimdall couldn't see what had caused this. He asked, and Heimdall glanced at him. "Thor, I am not an all-seeing god. I can't observe everything." Though he said this, the truth was that due to the Bifrost's destruction, he had been focusing on potential uprisings from the frost giants and dark elves, leaving him little time to monitor Midgard closely. Midgard had always been peaceful, with no capability to threaten Asgard, so it wasn't usually worth much attention, only getting occasional checks. Because of this, he hadn't noticed the initial cause of this phenomenon. Thor felt a bit embarrassed. Still, after Heimdall's suggestion, he seriously considered another trip to Midgard. Images of the mysterious figure in white, who possessed divine power, came to his mind. Last time, he hadn't figured out why that person had divine power. This time, he might get an answer. There was one problem though. But Heimdall, the Bifrost is destroyed. How do I get to Midgard? Thor looked confused. Don't worry, I have other means to send you to Midgard. Heimdall replied calmly. While they conversed, on Earth, the phenomenon was almost over, and Syd was noticing the strange event caused by himself. He was astonished. What was going on? Could this be related to Baldur being the personification of light? Is that why awakening the divine power of light caused this phenomenon? Syd recalled some information about Baldur, the Norse god of light. In Norse mythology, Baldur was born with the divine power of light. His awakening was similar to the birth of the god of light. The birth of a god would surely be accompanied by some phenomena, especially for the god of light. At this moment, Venom, now back in Syd's right hand, was filled with shock and confusion, communicating with him through their mental link. Hey Syd, what just happened? You glowing is one thing, but why was the sky glowing too? And my emotions seem off. Venom explained its recent experiences. As Venom spoke, Syd understood more about what had happened. Besides the glowing sky, everyone touched by the light had their emotions affected, becoming peaceful and joyous. As to why this happened, Syd only needed a moment to figure it out. Baldur, the Norse god of light, was the child of Odin and Frigga, considered the personification of light. In mythology, he was adored by all, and his presence allowed all beings to bask in light. He symbolized the sun, representing goodness and joy. So he was also the god of joy. That's likely why being illuminated by this light made Venom feel peaceful and joyous, Syd mused, stroking his chin. Aside from this possibility, he couldn't think of another explanation. Thinking further, Syd recalled some things. Baldur's death symbolized the end of light and the triumph of darkness. Even the sun's light and warmth would fade. In traditional mythology, the beginning of Ragnarok was closely tied to this. The death of Baldur marked the turning point where the forces of good began to wane. Considering this, Syd suddenly thought of a new question. If 50% unlocking caused this phenomenon, what would 100% do? Syd wasn't sure what would happen then. With that thought, he started to explore the effects of the divine power of light, or the newly transformed light energy. End of chapter. Chapter 151. Chapter 151. After a while of testing, Syd roughly figured out some details. Aside from the radiance affecting people's emotions, due to the purification and specialization of the light energy, the power of abilities like level 4 black particles had increased somewhat, and he could now perform them over 200 times. If that was all, Syd would still be a bit disappointed. Even though the light divine power was only at level 1 and shouldn't have a significant effect, he still felt it was somewhat useless. Fortunately, he noticed some other differences as well. With the awakening of the light divine power, Syd realized he had a special ability. Looking up at the sunlight shining down, in the next second, the sunlight within a certain range began to twist and deform. As his thoughts focused and concentrated, countless rays of sunlight gathered together, as if through a magnifying glass, and shone directly onto the ground. In an instant, the ground began to smoke. Just by looking, Syd could tell that the power of this beam was considerable. Not only was the temperature extremely high, but its penetrating power might also be very strong. This ability to control light felt novel to Syd. It was his first time trying to control sunlight without being in direct sunlight. He could feel that the surrounding sunlight was like an extension of his body. Realizing this, a thought flashed through Syd's mind. He tried to gather sunlight around himself, hoping to speed up the recovery of light energy and the collection of energy points. To his surprise, the speed did increase, but, after half a minute, Syd gave up this action. Because the energy absorption was only at level 2, there was an upper limit to the speed of absorbing sunlight. Even though the consumption was minimal when controlling sunlight through divine power, it didn't mean there was no consumption at all. Not bad. In the end, Syd could only come to this conclusion, feeling a bit underwhelmed. Or perhaps it was because the light divine power was only at level 1, limiting its effects. Syd felt that if the light divine power were to be enhanced, it might have unexpected effects. For example, the ability to self-recover. Syd pondered. Even if the light energy inside his body was exhausted, it could self-recover without sunlight, so he wouldn't be in a tough spot in environments like nighttime. The improvement of ability levels would also be much faster. Syd believed that this wasn't just wishful thinking. He could directly refer to Thor. After all, Thor couldn't absorb sunlight to recover light energy like he could. Although Thor's energy was likely drawn from Asgard, that didn't matter to Syd. Drawing power from Asgard wasn't something to be ashamed of. Such a large power source was enough for him to absorb. I just don't know if this effect will appear at level 3, 4, or 5. At this moment, he couldn't wait to level up the light divine power. Syd continued to practice the light divine power eagerly. Light divine power experience +1. Divine body experience +1. Syd was somewhat surprised. As the light divine power operated, not only did the divine power increase, but the divine body also indirectly improved. Originally, he thought the level 3 divine body was insufficient, but now it was just right, saving him the time to enhance the divine body. Under the sunlight, he quickly practiced the light divine power and divine body. However, before he could practice for long, some unexpected guests interrupted him. Syd frowned slightly, looking towards the abandoned factory. Footsteps approached. Against the sunlight, several agents in black uniforms quickly walked in. Leading them was a woman in a blue and red combat suit with blonde hair. With just one glance, Syd recognized who it was from her attire. It was none other than Captain Marvel. Syd frowned. He was naturally familiar with Captain Marvel, a figure known as the most powerful superhero. Although this claim was questionable, her strength was undeniable. He vaguely remembered that her power came mainly from the Space Stone. During a mission, a light-speed engine containing a huge amount of energy exploded, and the energy directly infused her body. It could be said that she was like a walking infinity stone, possessing terrifying power. Without the stones, Thanos couldn't take her on one-on-one. She was even stronger than a single infinity stone. Or rather, the power of the infinity stones was so immense that most people couldn't harness much of it, whereas she could perfectly utilize the energy in her body. In this context, she naturally appeared more formidable. Syd frowned slightly. The purpose of her visit was clear. She wasn't here for pleasantries. Once they reached a certain distance, the group stopped. The agents remained silent, but Captain Marvel spoke. "Are you the Messiah?" Looking at the black-clad young man not far away, Captain Marvel Carol's eyes flashed with curiosity and seriousness. In the next second, she continued, "Messiah, Omega-level mutant, once destroyed a city, eradicated the progenitor of mutants, Apocalypse. You possess teleportation, emit black waves, and blue energy beams." Captain Marvel Carol slowly recounted Syd's information, revealing both well-known and some hidden details, almost exposing all of Syd's secrets. Finally, Captain Marvel Carol smiled, as if she had the upper hand, and asked, "I know a lot about you. Am I right?" The agents also showed faint smiles, as if they had already seen Messiah's defeated expression. Listening to her recount, Syd remained indifferent. "Oh, really? That's quite a coincidence. I know a lot about you too." In the next second, with Captain Marvel Carol looking puzzled and the agents astonished, Syd slowly began to speak. "Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, during a mission, you blew up a light-speed engine, causing the energy to leak out and infuse your body, turning you into a superhuman. You have super strength, flight, energy projection." As he spoke calmly, the agents showed expressions of shock, and Captain Marvel Carol's expression froze. "How do you know about me?" Captain Marvel Carol asked in shock. End of chapter. Chapter 152. Chapter 152. You. Captain Marvel was utterly shocked. How did this Messiah know so much about her? Even the details of how she gained her powers during a mission? These events happened years ago, so how could Messiah know? For a moment, Carol's eyes sharpened, staring straight at Messiah. Syd calmly returned her gaze. He knew well about this character, comparable to DC's Superman, capable of destroying spaceships with sheer physical strength when fully powered. "What do you want?" Syd asked calmly. Recovering from her surprise, Captain Marvel raised an eyebrow and said, "Fury sent me to check on you." As soon as she finished speaking, she unexpectedly charged forward. Colorful radiance emerged from her hand, and she threw a punch towards Syd's face. Syd frowned slightly. His extraordinary reflexes kicked in, allowing him to react quickly. He had no intention of taking the hit directly. He knew that Carol's seemingly ordinary punch carried immense power, comparable to Thor and the Hulk, far exceeding Spider-Man. Naturally, he wouldn't be foolish enough to block it with his hand. To the surprise of Carol and the agents, Syd raised his right hand and pointed a finger at the incoming punch. Carol hesitated for a moment, then sneered. Did this guy really think he could block her punch with a finger? Idiot! In an instant, her fist collided with his finger. Divine finger experience +1. Boom! The sound of shattering glass echoed. As space fragments shattered, Carol felt a tremendous force from her fist, catching her off guard. With a loud crash, she was sent flying backward. Her feet dug into the ground, and Captain Marvel finally steadied herself. Her fist and wrist bore some scratches, blood flowing from them. However, it didn't flow for long before stopping, indicating her self-healing ability. Carol was astonished. It had been a long time since she had experienced injury. Even though it was minor, it was still unbelievable. This guy could break through her defense. The observing agents were equally shocked. Messiah's aura was as overwhelming as ever. Despite the brief exchange, they felt a suffocating, desperate pressure. You! Carol glared at the young man. Syd looked at her calmly and said, "What gave you the courage to face me in your normal state?" "You do know." Carol frowned, flexing her wrist. She had indeed wanted to test if she could deal with Messiah in her normal state. Clearly, she failed. His power was too troublesome. Consider that a warm-up. Carol smiled arrogantly, clenching her fist. In the next second, to the astonishment of the agents and Syd, her entire body began to radiate colorful light, extremely dazzling. She gradually floated up, looking down at Messiah and the distant agents from above. Looking up at Carol, the agents were in awe. This was Captain Marvel, daring to challenge Messiah. She looked incredibly powerful. While they marveled at her, Syd glanced at the sunlight outside. In the next second, sunlight within 100 meters focused into beams, shooting towards Carol's chest in a flash. What dash? Captain Marvel didn't react in time, nor did anyone else. By the time she noticed, the beam had already reached her chest. Simultaneously, the powerful light pressure formed by the gathered sunlight hit her, sending her flying out of the abandoned factory. The agents were stunned as they watched Captain Marvel being suddenly knocked back. Syd looked up and saw Captain Marvel stopping herself after being blasted a distance away outside the factory. Standing in the sunlight, she endured the continuous impact of the light beam without showing any pain. Syd stopped the light beam attack, and it gradually dissipated. This woman can indeed absorb light. The light beam had not harmed her. Instead, she absorbed a lot of it. Without reaching a certain threshold to break her absorption limit, it seemed unwise to use this ability recklessly. Under the watchful eyes of Captain Marvel and the agents, Syd began to float as well. A strange and sacred melody played. As he floated, an awe-inspiring aura emanated from him, contrasting sharply with Captain Marvel. Syd also flew outside, facing off against Captain Marvel in the air. "You've pissed me off, kid." Captain Marvel stretched her body, preparing for a real fight, and said, "That was a new move, right? It didn't seem impressive, but it did recharge me a bit. Felt good." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly raised her right hand and swung it towards Syd. Boom! A colorful energy wave shot out at incredible speed. Syd reacted quickly, leaving an afterimage as he dodged, appearing half a meter to the side. Boom! The energy wave hit the ground, creating a large crater. It didn't end there. In the next second, Captain Marvel launched another energy wave at him. This time, Syd didn't dodge. He raised his right hand to block it. Reflective shield experience +1. An invisible U-shaped reflective shield appeared, blocking the energy wave. Boom! 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 Captain Marvel Carol, glowing with radiance, continuously fired energy waves. Syd, on the other hand, kept using the reflective shield to absorb the energy waves. This Messiah. Carol frowned. Feeling the limit approaching, Syd said coldly, "Your moves aren't that great. This energy will do nicely." In the next second, he aimed his right hand at Carol. Boom! A larger energy wave appeared, one that Carol was very familiar with, as it was the energy she had been firing. Syd released all the absorbed energy at once. In almost an instant, Carol's energy wave was overwhelmed, and she was engulfed and blasted away by the energy wave. End of chapter. Chapter 153. Chapter 153. 1000 PS reached. Next goal. 1500 PS. Under the watchful eyes of the agents below, Syd moved swiftly to follow up. Reflective shield experience +1. Black particle experience +1. A black wave appeared in his hand, shooting towards the retreating Carol. But just as it reached her, she dodged sideways. At this moment, she looked somewhat disheveled, her hair messy, and her battlesuit had some damage. If it weren't for her energy protection, her suit would have been more than just slightly damaged. It might not have even existed anymore. Despite this, she hadn't sustained any significant injuries. Her nickname as a tank was well-deserved. In a blink, Syd saw her appearing in front of him, her fist already close to his face. The enormous kinetic energy and power in her punch met an invisible shield, causing ripples to appear. Syd had initially thought of using the reflective shield to swallow her, pulling her into a void space, but it seemed impossible. Whether it was due to the energy on her fist or the inability of the shield to absorb living beings, it didn't work. The reflective shield absorbed most of the kinetic energy and power instantly, but the remaining force pushed Syd into the sky. Before he could recover, Carol flashed with radiance, and in a streak of light, she reappeared in front of him, throwing another punch. Syd shifted slightly to the right, dodging the punch as they passed each other. Thus, the two engaged in a skyward battle, with colorful energy waves and black pulses appearing intermittently. Boom! A blue beam occasionally streaked across the sky. The sonic booms from their flight echoed around them. The commotion in the sky drew the attention of many on the ground. Previously, the unusual sunlight had kept most people out in the streets, and now they directly noticed the scene above. What is that? Are they fighting? Who are they? Watching the two figures constantly darting across the sky, the onlookers below were stunned. Such a commotion was terrifying. Even from a distance, they could feel the impact of the battle. Some even wondered if they were closer, would they be killed by the shockwaves? As they marveled, debated, and took photos, Syd felt the situation becoming tricky. This woman's speed. Carol's figure continuously appeared around him, her speed incredible, at least several times the speed of sound. This caught Syd off guard. Without his chaotic magic enhancing his reflexes, he might not have been able to keep up with her speed. During this time, he noticed a difference. His floating speed had increased slightly. Because of the divine power? Syd immediately thought of the reason. If the divine power could enhance other abilities, it naturally could also increase his floating speed. He had thought his flying speed was almost fixed, but it turned out it could be improved, which pleasantly surprised him. Because of this, facing Carol became slightly easier. But even so, in terms of speed, he was still at a disadvantage. Without the two reflective shields constantly protecting him, he might have been hit already. Watching Carol break through the reflective shields, Syd frowned. It was no surprise she was called the most powerful superhero, comparable to Superman. Her strength was indeed formidable. Moreover, Syd knew that this wasn't even Carol's full speed. Due to being on the ground, she didn't dare push her speed to the maximum. Even at their current speed, the battle had caused a series of adverse effects. Strong winds swept the ground, causing people to scream in terror, desperately seeking cover. Occasionally, an energy wave, a black particle wave, or a spirit power beam hit the ground, causing significant destruction. Boom! Debris flew, creating large craters or deep cuts on the ground, scaring the passers-by. It's Messiah. Who is he fighting? Terrifying. Lord, please protect us. Terrified shouts filled the streets, and even a priest closed his eyes, praying for divine protection. As the battle's shockwave spread, more people noticed the fight. Even several satellites turned their focus towards the area. The battle scene shocked many, with analysts calculating data from their fight, leading to astonishing results. Meanwhile, some noticed a particular anomaly. Sir, compared to the last fight with Apocalypse, Messiah's flight speed seems to have increased significantly. A data analyst reported. A bearded general beside him looked incredulous, mumbling, could the rumors about Messiah be true? At this point, Some officers whispered among themselves. Who will win? They both look so powerful. I can't believe someone can fight Messiah to this extent. That woman is really strong. Messiah won't lose, will he? As they discussed, Syd was sent flying by another punch from Carol. An invisible reflective shield couldn't withstand the pressure and silently dissipated. Syd frowned. During this period, he had mostly been suppressed. This woman's speed was too fast, and he could feel her accelerating. Syd wasn't sure if she would go crazy and push her speed to extreme levels. Uncertain, but sensing a potential crisis, he decided not to continue the standoff. He began to glow, illuminating the surroundings more brightly than Carol's radiance, drawing her attention and momentarily pausing her attacks. What is this? Carol was startled. Not only she, but countless onlookers also noticed, some immediately guessing what was happening. Was Messiah about to use that ability? As they wondered, a terrifying scene unfolded. Within a kilometer, the sunlight twisted uniformly. End of chapter. Chapter 154. Chapter 154. Watching the surrounding sunlight twist, everyone within a kilometer showed expressions of shock and fear. The scene was familiar, reminiscent of the time when an entire city was destroyed. For many, it was the first time witnessing Messiah use such a large-scale ability again. If he successfully executed it, then, clearly, the next step would be sunlight appearing, and then they would all turn to ashes, vanishing without a trace. No! Messiah, spare us! Oh God! Countless people on the ground looked desperate, begging Messiah to spare their lives. Captain Marvel was also alarmed, recognizing what Messiah intended to do. She knew she couldn't let him unleash that terrifying ability. If he did, not only would everything within the radius disappear, but she would also be in danger. Her intuition sensed the imminent threat. If she allowed Messiah to proceed without evading, she might be in trouble. She understood that breaking through Messiah's defense in a short time was impossible. His defense was too bizarre. There was only one way. Kid, let's end today's battle here. We'll continue this unfinished fight next time. With that, Carol's body flashed with colorful light, and in the next moment, she appeared far away. Like a meteor streaking across the sky, she quickly reached a distant location, clearly beyond a kilometer. 2 kilometers away. Messiah, this battle isn't over. We'll finish it next time. Captain Marvel thought resolutely. In her view, this abrupt end was due to the unsuitable battle location. Fighting within the city easily endangered civilians. If they fought outside the city next time, the battle wouldn't end so easily. Carol was confident that Messiah wouldn't be her match then. This confidence stemmed not only from her own strength, but also from the countless battles she had fought and won in outer space over the years. She had faced all kinds of enemies and always won. This time would be no different. Carol thought confidently. Far away. Syd raised his eyes, watching Captain Marvel fly away without attempting to stop her. Or perhaps Carol's decision to leave was also guided by him. Otherwise, the sunburst would have been activated long ago. They wouldn't think that during its activation, they would have time to ponder, hesitate, and think. Sunburst sounds better. As long as Syd wanted, Sunburst could activate immediately, without any delay for thoughts. As for why he guided Carol to leave, Syd had thought it through. He wasn't sure what Carol's top speed was. Even earlier, it had been several times the speed of sound. Such speed would allow her to move a kilometer away in an instant when Sunburst activated. If Sunburst activated and she escaped its range, and his light energy was too depleted from the attack, the situation would be dire. This was why he guided Carol to leave. Moreover, he found Captain Marvel somewhat tricky to handle. With her speed, it was difficult for him to deal with her at his current strength. Forcing her to retreat would give him some time to grow stronger. The feeling of being suppressed by speed is really uncomfortable. Syd shook his head. He had thought his speed was fast enough. Even surpassing the speed of sound, he could still be suppressed. And not just Captain Marvel. Even Quicksilver's speed exceeded his. But, as he pondered, Syd thought of the light divine power. The light divine power could enhance the intensity of other abilities. Currently, it was only at level 1, yet it had already increased his flying speed significantly. As it improved, His floating speed would skyrocket. Not only his floating speed but other abilities would also be enhanced. The Light Divine Power was a versatile ability, currently the most crucial one to improve. With it enhanced, his strength would continue to grow. When Carol returned, it wouldn't be so easy for her. Thinking about improving the Light Divine Power, Syd glanced at the relieved people on the ground, then turned and flew away. Boom! Hearing the sonic boom overhead, countless people on the ground sighed in relief. Many hugged each other, crying tears of joy. The feeling of being saved from near death was indescribable. Several satellites in space captured images of Messiah leaving. That woman just ran away? Is Messiah really that terrifying? Keep fighting. A military officer watching the satellite feed grumbled. At this point, a tall, thin officer beside him scoffed. If Messiah wasn't terrifying and you weren't afraid, you should go. You've seen his Omega-level abilities. Anyone would run from that kind of power. Ah! The officer felt embarrassed hearing this. He had just made an offhand comment. Facing Messiah's terrifying Omega abilities, anyone would run. He would too if he could. In the end, we still didn't see who was stronger, that woman or Messiah. Both generals and ordinary officers felt a sense of regret. Even though the woman ran away, they didn't think she had necessarily lost. Maybe next time, they'd know the outcome? While they speculated, footage of the event was soon uploaded online by people on the ground. Though incomplete, the scenes of their battle shocked many. Are they even human? These two are monsters, right? The battle's shockwaves alone sent chills down their spines. People started to discuss. That woman is really strong. Has Messiah met his match? Unfortunately, the woman ran away, leaving them without a conclusion to the battle. But from the looks of the fight, it seemed Messiah was slightly at a disadvantage? If that's true, many eagerly anticipated the next battle, hoping to see Messiah defeated. Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Watching the recorded footage, Charles Xavier's eyes showed a hint of worry. Where did this powerful individual come from? End of chapter. Chapter 155. Chapter 155. It's uncertain if this woman will impact the mutants. The situation for mutants has been dire lately, with many being arrested by Sentinel robots. If this woman joins in. While everyone was dealing with mixed emotions, Syd had moved to a different location, studying some things. He obtained a timer from a group of small-time thugs and came to a secluded grassy area to test his speed. In the grassy clearing, Syd's body gradually began to float. The next second, boom! Accompanied by a sonic boom, a residual image was left in place as his figure appeared several hundred meters away. He stopped flying and picked up the timer he had just pressed. After glancing at the displayed number, Syd conducted several more tests. Watching the numbers on the timer, Syd was deep in thought. Calculating the distance and time, he roughly estimated his current flight speed. Close to twice the speed of sound. It seems Carol's movement speed is at least 3 times the speed of sound. Syd frowned slightly, dissatisfied with his speed. Being nearly twice the speed of sound couldn't even match the missiles that bombarded him earlier, which were at least 3 times the speed of sound, let alone Captain Marvel Carol. With his current flying speed, if it weren't for his chaotic magic enhancing his reflexes and keen perception, he might have already been defeated by Carol. If his speed doesn't increase, he would still be suppressed next time they face each other. Syd's attention turned to the Light Divine Power. The next second, he activated the divine power within his body. Light Divine Power Experience +1. Divine Body Experience +1. As the divine power operated within him, not only did his divine power experience increase, but his divine body also improved. While practicing, time quickly passed, and soon it was noon. Syd had been practicing since early morning and was greeted by a familiar notification sound. Light Divine Power Experience +1. With the notification, the Light Divine Power's data changed instantly. Ability: Light Divine Power, 0/500, Level 2. At the same time, changes occurred in his body, similar to when he first awakened the Light Divine Power. However, there was no external glow, and no anomalies appeared in the surroundings. The overall quality of the light energy fused with the divine power improved, becoming more condensed, and even the sense of the extraordinary and divine increased significantly. This also meant that abilities like black particles indirectly became stronger, especially the speed of his floating flight. However, Syd's attention wasn't on the flying speed at this moment, but on another special ability. With a thought, he immediately felt the sunlight within a 300-meter radius responding to his will. The range increased from about 100 meters to over 300 meters. As the light divine power reached level 2, he immediately sensed an increase in his control range over sunlight, and even, with a slight raise of his hand, the sunlight outside condensed into a line, forming a ring around his finger. At that moment, he felt his control over sunlight or photons had risen to a new level. Syd stepped into the sunlight, feeling the high temperature. The next second, the nearby sunlight transformed. The thermal energy in the sunlight vanished, and the sunlight hitting him became cool light, having brightness without heat. It was like the difference between sunlight and electric light. The power of the light god is truly something. Syd felt pleased. With the light divine power reaching level 2, he started to feel some of the divine power, which was significantly better than the almost unchanged state at level 1. Or perhaps, this was the power a deity should possess. Previously, he had wondered why the light divine power awakening didn't bring much change, unlike Thor, who exhibited far greater power upon awakening. It turned out it was due to the low level of divine power. This is just level 2. What about the higher levels? Syd anticipated. Even level 2 had such power. What about levels 3, 4, and 5? How much could his control over photons improve? Without discussing the numerous abilities based on light, like invisibility or even transforming into light for light speed travel. Of course, these were just imaginations, though possible. Aside from these potential abilities, with the control range over sunlight reaching over 300 meters, the power of the condensed light beam also surged. Both the impact force and the high temperature. With a thought, the sky darkened as sunlight within a 300-meter range focused into a beam. It was like a space-based weapon, forming a beam that shot down. Under his control. With a sizzling sound, the ground was scorched, leaving a black mark with flames rising where the beam passed. Several blackened marks appeared, creating a somewhat terrifying scene. I wonder if Captain Marvel can absorb a beam of this level? Syd pondered. Everything has a limit, and he believed Carol was no exception. She could absorb energy, but what if there was too much energy for her to absorb in a short time? Even if this beam wasn't enough, as the light divine power increased and the control range expanded, the beam's power would continue to surge. There would come a time when Captain Marvel Carol couldn't absorb it all. Then, controlling sunlight would not just be a flashy ability but one that could threaten her. Although it couldn't deal with Carol now, it was more than enough for ordinary opponents. Since controlling sunlight consumed little energy, it would be effortless to eliminate some regular enemies. After these thoughts, Syd focused on his floating flight. He was curious about how much his flying speed had increased. With curiosity, Syd held the timer and began testing. Boom! In an instant, his figure disappeared from the original spot, appearing far away. Whiz! Feeling the rushing wind, Syd frowned, feeling a bit uncomfortable. Even without calculations, he could clearly feel the significant speed increase, but his body seemed to struggle to withstand it. When he first used Thor's hammer to reach the speed of sound, he felt some discomfort. Now, even with a level 3 divine body, he was having trouble. End of chapter. Chapter 156. Chapter 156. Enduring the discomfort in his body, Syd flew a certain distance before stopping. After stopping, he glanced at the timer and quickly did some calculations. Approximately 2.4 times the speed of sound. Calculating the distance and time, the result made Syd somewhat satisfied. Considering the light divine power was only at level 2, the improvements were decent. However, the speed increase brought his body's limitations to his attention. Clearly, his body's strength was starting to fall behind his speed, even though the light divine power provided some enhancements to the divine body. Thinking this over, Syd's attention turned to his divine body. Reaching level 4 for the divine body still required a significant amount of experience. Even if the light divine power reached level 3, the divine body wouldn't yet be level 4. I hope the speed increase at level 3 won't be too excessive. Syd thought wryly. If his flight speed increased but his body couldn't handle such high speeds, it would be quite amusing. Fortunately, operating the light divine power also increased the experience of the divine body, so it should level up quickly. Once his internal divine power, or light energy, was fully restored, Syd estimated he could use his level 4 abilities over 220 times. Aside from this, he didn't notice any other changes in the light divine power. The expected automatic recovery ability hadn't appeared. It seems it might appear at level 3, 4, or even 5, Syd thought. After considering this, he continued to operate his internal light energy while standing in the sunlight. Light divine power experience +1. Divine body experience +1. While operating, he began to walk away from the area. Shortly after he left, someone noticed the strange environment and reported it to the authorities. Soon, a group of uniformed personnel with instruments arrived. What happened here? Staring at the large blackened area and the numerous scorch marks on the grassy field, the agents were stunned. What kind of situation could cause this? The severe environment was alarming. A middle-aged man in a suit squatted down and touched the charred ground. The anomaly in this area doesn't look natural or like it was caused by high-powered weapons. It seems like... Is there another powerful mutant? Or an unusual superhuman? The man analyzed. Turning, he asked a female agent operating a laptop nearby, "Did you find any information on who might have been here?" No unusual individuals were detected, so it seems the person was very cautious, the female agent replied. Report this, the middle-aged agent named Lewis said. While they were taking photos, collecting information, and preparing to report, Syd had found another location. Time passed, and Syd continued to operate his internal light energy while avoiding detection. Soon, it was the afternoon of the third day, and Syd was greeted by the sound he had been waiting for. Light divine power experience +1. Ability. Light divine power, 0/1000, level 3. With the notification, his internal light energy underwent another transformation, becoming even more condensed and extraordinary. Once the internal changes were complete, Syd felt a natural increase in his control over sunlight. With a thought, the sunlight within a range of 700 to 800 meters twisted and condensed. Without testing, just by visual observation, Syd knew the power of the light beam had increased significantly. And even, in an astonishing display, the sunlight above began to change color under his control. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. A rainbow appeared in the sky, beautiful and stunning. Moreover, the rainbow descended from the sky, surrounding him. Venom, once again forced out of his right hand, looked stiff and speechless, not knowing what to say. Being around Syd, it seemed there was no end to strange occurrences. Venom watched the incredible scene in bewilderment, while Syd pondered, my control over light, or photons, has increased to this level. Under his control, light could now change to different colors, representing different wavelengths. Thinking this over, Syd started experimenting, and a burst of colorful radiance flickered around him, making him look quite strange. At this point, he was trying to achieve invisibility using light. After a while, Syd gave up. He realized his control over light wasn't sufficient to achieve true optical invisibility. Higher control was needed. Of course, in a dark environment, he could still avoid being noticed. After researching his control over light, he returned to the most critical aspect. I wonder how much my flight speed has increased. After a moment, he began testing again. Boom! The sound of a sonic boom echoed. Feeling the rushing wind and the discomfort from the high speed, he quickly stopped at his designated endpoint. Phew! Syd's tense nerves relaxed. Glancing at the timer, he quickly calculated. Soon, he roughly estimated his current flight speed. 3.3 times the speed of sound. Not bad. Syd smiled. With a speed around 3 times the speed of sound, those missiles from before would have a hard time catching up to me. Of course, he knew there were faster missiles out there. His current speed was just not bad. In addition to the significant speed increase, the endurance of his light energy also improved, allowing him to use his level 4 abilities around 260 times. Unfortunately, even at level 3, the anticipated automatic recovery effect hadn't appeared, leaving Syd a bit disappointed. After testing the effects, he turned his attention to his divine body, noticing it was close to leveling up. 2 days later, a notification echoed in his mind. Divine Body Experience +1. Ability. Divine Body, 0/2000, Level 4. As soon as the notification appeared, his body underwent remarkable changes. A warm current flowed throughout his body, altering his bones, muscles, and skin density. His physique and appearance also changed, becoming more perfect and handsome. End of chapter. Chapter 157. Chapter 157. The changes in Syd's appearance this time were much more significant than before. Even people familiar with him might be stunned for a moment before recognizing him. Inside his body, his blood had almost completely turned golden, containing strange energy. Even his cellular structure had changed. At this point, his body was very close to that of an Asgardian god. Just then, Syd's expression changed slightly as he felt a discomfort. He could clearly feel that his body was fighting against something, causing him this discomfort. In an instant, he guessed and sensed the truth. It's indeed because of the cancer cells. Syd frowned. It was only the cancer cells in his body that could make him feel this uncomfortable. Clearly, the divine body was trying to eliminate those cancer cells, restoring them to normal cells. If that was all, it would be fine. He could clearly feel a bizarre, twisted power rampaging through the cancer cells, preventing them from returning to normal. The old god. Syd's expression darkened. Once his body calmed down, he looked at the lifespan section. Age: 16, remaining lifespan: 131 days. Clearly, the cancer within his body was still present. Otherwise, with his divine physique, his lifespan should not be so limited. I wonder if those cancer cells will still exist when the divine body reaches level 5. Syd smirked. He believed that once his divine body reached level 5, his body would undergo a significant transformation, possibly completely ridding him of cancer. He wondered if the old god behind this would become enraged and powerless. Amused by the thought, Syd picked up a walnut-sized gray stone from the ground. Then, he lightly squeezed his right hand. With a cracking sound, Syd felt the stone in his hand shatter. Opening his hand, he saw the stone had broken into several pieces. He felt that with a bit more force, he could crush these pieces into powder. Setting aside the distressing issue of cancer, he couldn't help but marvel at his body's current strength. The divine physique was truly astounding. At level 4, the divine body allowed him to easily crush stones without injuring his hand, demonstrating immense strength and defense. To test his body's strength, Syd thought for a while and then went to a zoo he hadn't visited before. Familiar with the layout, he approached a tiger in an unoccupied area and deliberately provoked it. Roar! The tiger roared angrily, swiping its paw at the annoying person in front of it and even biting him. But to the tiger's confusion, the person showed no signs of injury, nor did he move. It was as if the tiger had clawed and bitten a stone. This baffling scene left the tiger dumbfounded. It raised its paw and gently patted the person a few times, looking utterly silly. Syd chuckled, shook his head, and left, not bothering to continue teasing the tiger. A level 4 divine body, and not even a tiger can break my defense. Syd mused. My strength has increased significantly. If I face Captain Marvel again, I wonder what the outcome would be. Time passed quickly, and soon another 10 days had gone by. Sunlight streamed in through the window as Syd restored his light energy depleted from practice. Stretching, he looked at his stats with satisfaction. In these 10 days, due to his compulsive tendencies, he had upgraded all the Orochi abilities on his panel to level 4, except for spatial transfer. Considering he had floating flight and the low consumption of level 2 spatial transfer, he hadn't chosen to upgrade it yet. Moreover, the light divine power was about to reach level 4. Ability: Light Divine Power, 806/1000, Level 3. Syd was eagerly anticipating the Light Divine Power reaching Level 4. Light Divine Power Experience +1. Divine Body Experience +1. As he continued operating his internal light energy, preparing to upgrade the Light Divine Power to Level 4, far away in a forest, a group of yellow-robed mages were conversing. Master Caecilius, Shield hasn't reported any anomalies recently. A burly man named Peli said respectfully. Caecilius, The core figure, surrounded by dozens of mages, frowned and murmured, "Still no changes." Hearing his murmur, a recently joined mage looked puzzled. "Caecilius, why are you so fixated on this mundane organization? Even if it's powerful and has interesting things, it shouldn't warrant your constant attention, right? Are you trying to obtain something from S.H.I.E.L.D.? If so, we should just take it instead of all this trouble." As a newly joined mage, Ulysses didn't understand why Caecilius was doing this. Caecilius glanced at him and, after some thought, explained under the gaze of the other mages, "The great demon has foretold that S.H.I.E.L.D. will undergo changes." Ulysses hesitated, his eyes showing doubt. He wasn't sure if the demon Caecilius mentioned was real or just a ploy. Despite being in the group for a while, he had never seen the demon. Caecilius hadn't even performed a ritual to communicate with the demon, always brushing him off with "the time isn't right," making him more suspicious. Can Caecilius really contact an entity beyond time, a dimensional demon? Not just him, but the other nearly 10 new mages also had doubts. They had seen the pages Caecilius had on the Great Being. But those pages also mentioned that no one had successfully communicated with it. Such entities were always mysterious, hidden, elusive, and unknowable. Had Caecilius really communicated with it? Moreover, they doubted the prophecy. Could the mysterious demon Caecilius mentioned really predict the future? Caecilius, aware of their expressions, felt some doubt himself, unsure if the great demon's prophecy would come true. As they continued discussing, a strange ringtone suddenly echoed in the quiet forest. All eyes turned towards the source. Peli, the burly man, looked embarrassed as he awkwardly took out a cell phone from his clothes. As soon as he answered, he heard surprising news. End of chapter. Chapter 158. Chapter 158. 500 Power Stones reached. Next goal. 1000 PS. S.H.I.E.L.D. has encountered a change? Peli's face was full of surprise as he listened to the voice on the other end of the phone. A while ago, they had used some small tricks to plant insiders within S.H.I.E.L.D. As soon as something happened at S.H.I.E.L.D., they would be informed. The phone Peli carried was for this purpose, as he typically didn't use one. Someone broke into S.H.I.E.L.D.? Peli looked astonished. As the person on the other end explained, he pieced together the situation. Just recently, alarms had sounded within S.H.I.E.L.D. A powerful individual had forcefully broken in. Their insider, who constantly monitored S.H.I.E.L.D.'s internal affairs, immediately knew that the event the mages had been waiting for might be starting, and promptly called to inform them. After hanging up, Peli relayed the entire situation to Caecilius and the others. Ulysses, who had joined the group not long ago and had previously questioned Caecilius, was stunned. Is the prophecy of the demon god coming true? Not only him, but nearly 10 other new mages also showed expressions of surprise and skepticism. Caecilius pondered, the person who broke in is likely after the Tesseract. Master Caecilius, why do you say that? Peli and the others were puzzled, not understanding why he was so certain the intruder was after the Tesseract. Caecilius explained briefly. Recently, the Tesseract was returned to S.H.I.E.L.D. I performed a magical ritual to communicate with the great demon god, asking if we needed to retrieve the Tesseract, but the demon god had no interest in taking it back. The great demon god revealed that Earth was about to face its destined fate, and it would be unwise to interfere. Caecilius' face grew solemn. I speculate that Earth will soon experience a major event, one that the demon god has foreseen and does not wish to alter, which is why I wasn't instructed to retrieve the Tesseract at that time. A major event? What kind of event could attract the attention of such a being? Ulysses and the others found it unbelievable and couldn't imagine what could be significant enough to warrant such concern. According to Caecilius, Earth would soon face this significant event. But would it really happen? An event so significant that even the demon god took notice? Could such a thing truly exist? If it were true, the demon god's ability to foresee such events indicated immense power. Ulysses and the others hesitated, contemplating. Caecilius then waved his hand, conjuring a portal and retrieving a pile of magical materials from the other side, preparing to perform a ritual to communicate with the great demon god. Seeing his actions, Ulysses and the others, realizing what was about to happen, were filled with anticipation. As new members, they had never interacted with the demon god. Now, It seemed they would finally get the chance. Soon, with the help of Peli and the others, the ritual to communicate with the demon god was prepared. Kaecilius stood at the center, initiating the ritual. As the ritual began, he sensed a mysterious, ethereal presence, like the will of the universe. Great demon god, your humble servant has something to report. As you predicted, S.H.I.E.L.D. has encountered a change. Someone has broken in. What should we do next? Do you require us to take any action? Far away, as Syd operated his internal light energy, he paused, hearing Kaecilius' prayer. Syd's mind raced. The Chitauri invasion is finally coming, and Loki is about to appear? The event was occurring sooner than he had anticipated, but it didn't matter as long as the Mind Stone and other Infinity Stone-related items appeared. As for Kaecilius' question about what they should do, after a moment of thought, Syd said, "You need do nothing but ensure that the Tesseract remains on Earth." The mysterious, sacred voice echoed in Kaecilius' mind. Kaecilius responded respectfully. Understood. Just as Syd was about to end the communication, Kaecilius' question caught him off guard. Great demon god, what event is about to occur on Earth that warrants your attention? Despite hesitating for a moment, Kaecilius couldn't resist asking. The eyes of the dozen mages around him lit up, filled with curiosity and anticipation. They too were eager to know what event could be so significant. Syd was momentarily stunned, then pondered for a few seconds. The next moment, the sacred voice resonated in the minds of Kaecilius and the others. Earth is about to face its destined fate. It will be invaded. A war will begin, one with widespread impact. Earth will experience a cataclysmic event. The demon god's mysterious voice left Kaecilius and the others in a daze. They clearly heard the words, but they were filled with confusion, not entirely understanding the meaning. They wanted to ask for specifics but didn't dare, so they could only speculate. An invasion from an external force? What kind of force? They had some understanding of the first statement but were puzzled by the second. A war with widespread impact? What kind of situation could be described as such by the demon god? And what did cataclysmic event mean for Earth? What was going on? Kaecilius and the others were perplexed. Then, the demon god's voice spoke again. All right, just follow my instructions. You don't need to know too much about other matters. With that, the demon god ended the communication, and the glow of the magical array gradually dimmed. Kaecilius and the others exchanged glances. The demon god's words were cryptic, or perhaps all prophetic statements were inherently vague. Couldn't they be more straightforward? The mages were filled with curiosity, their minds ablaze with questions. At the same time, human nature made them somewhat skeptical, not fully believing the demon god's words. However, they figured that soon they would know whether the demon god's prophecy was true. What would happen, and would it align with the great demon god's prediction? Ulysses and the others wondered. After cleaning up the traces of the ritual, they quietly left, heading to S.H.I.E.L.D. to monitor the Tesseract as instructed by the demon god. If any unusual situation arose, they could intervene promptly. End of chapter. Chapter 159. Chapter 159. Shortly after everyone left the area, a bald woman wearing yellow robes emerged from the shadows. It was the Ancient One from Camartage. She had been closely monitoring Kaecilius, trying to uncover their intentions and the purpose of the unknown demon god. She wanted to determine if they posed any threat to Earth. Hidden in the distance, she had overheard the conversation between Kaecilius and the unknown demon god. This left the Ancient One deeply shocked. Possessing the Time Stone, she naturally knew about some future events. But that the unknown demon god could also know the future? This was astonishing. The Time Stone, a relic from the dawn of the universe, allowed her to see these things, which wasn't particularly surprising or magical. But that the unknown demon god also knew? What did this indicate? The Ancient One's face grew solemn. She understood that this meant the unknown demon god possessed power beyond her imagination, possibly even being one of the multiversal-level gods. Unknown demon god, what is your purpose? The Ancient One murmured. Regardless of his intentions, she would keep a close watch, even if it meant sacrificing her life. Thinking this, a yellow portal appeared, and the Ancient One stepped through. The Tesseract has awakened. It lies in a small space, in the world of humans. Humans try to control it, use it. But only our ally knows how to harness its power. Send our ally to Earth as the vanguard. We, the Chitauri, will follow. This planet belongs to him, but the universe will be ours. What can humans do? They can only wait for death. The Chitauri were eager, waiting for Loki to acquire the Tesseract and open a portal, signaling their invasion of Earth. They were confident that nothing on Earth could stop them. Neither man nor technology. At S.H.I.E.L.D. The entire facility was in chaos, with staff running everywhere. Outside the laboratory where the Tesseract was kept, gunfire echoed. Bang bang bang, countless bullets were fired at a figure dressed in black and green leather, holding a scepter. Loki walked forward unperturbed, ignoring the bullets from handguns and machine guns. While slightly annoyed, he said, "You Midgardians are truly amusing, developing devices to disrupt spatial teleportation." This displeased Loki. He should have been transported near the Tesseract using its power, but some interference prevented this, causing a delay. Though nothing could ultimately stop the Tesseract, he couldn't wait and decided to break in from outside. As Loki's voice echoed, far away in the crowd, Nick Fury, dressed in black with one eye covered by a patch, felt a sense of relief. Luckily, some thieves using portals for theft had appeared recently. Otherwise, they wouldn't have placed spatial disruptors near the Tesseract, along with other devices to disrupt its energy. Nick Fury was thankful, knowing it had prevented this intruder from succeeding immediately. Loki raised his hand, holding a golden scepter with a blue glowing gem at the top. ZZZ. Energy released, forming a white-blue orb that shot into the crowd. Ah! Screams erupted as many were injured. "Drop your weapon!" Nick Fury shouted. Loki ignored him, moving nimbly through the crowd, firing energy blasts from the scepter and stabbing people with it. It was like a wolf among sheep. The agents stood little chance. Due to the confined space, high-powered weapons like rocket launchers couldn't be used, creating a dangerous situation. Seeing this, Nick Fury rushed to the equipment housing the Tesseract. Moving quickly, he retrieved the Tesseract, placed it in a secure box, and prepared to retreat with it. While he was busy, Loki had taken down many and captured Hawkeye, praising him, "You're different." He then raised the Mind Stone scepter, aiming it at Hawkeye's chest. In the next moment, Hawkeye's eyes turned black, indicating he was under mind control. Affected by the Mind Stone, he would now obey Loki. However, a strong-willed person forced to act against their will might eventually break free. After controlling a few people, Loki turned and saw Nick Fury trying to take the Tesseract. Seeing him holding the box, Loki warned, "I need that. You should put it down." Nick Fury paused, looking around to see most people down. No need to be so tense. Realizing resistance was futile, Nick Fury tried to stall by starting a conversation. "Of course, there is. I came a long way for this," Loki said. With a smile, he added proudly, "I am Loki, from Asgard, and I carry a mission you cannot comprehend." Hearing this, Dr. Selvig, who was studying the Tesseract nearby, was shocked. "Loki, you're Thor's brother?" Having witnessed Thor's exploits not long ago, Dr. Selvig was astonished. Nick Fury continued, "We have no quarrel with you." Clearly, he thought this was related to Asgard. Loki scoffed, "An ant has no quarrel with a boot." Nick Fury's expression turned grim. "So you want to crush us?" He sensed the arrogance in Loki's tone, treating them as insignificant. Are all Asgardian gods this arrogant? End of chapter. Chapter 160. Chapter 160. At this moment, Hawkeye, controlled by the Mind Stone scepter, approached Loki and said, "Boss, Commander Fury is stalling for time." Nick Fury was about to say something when Hawkeye raised his gun and shot him. Nick Fury grunted and fell to the ground. Without caring whether Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., was dead or alive, Loki and his team grabbed the box containing the Tesseract and quickly headed out. As they moved away, Nick Fury, who wasn't seriously injured, regretted not persuading Carol to stay when she was preparing to leave. It would have prevented all this trouble. Meanwhile, Loki and his group encountered Agent Hill, who was slender and beautiful. "We need to use this car." Seeing Hawkeye and the others heading straight for a vehicle, Agent Hill was confused, not understanding what Hawkeye was doing. Suddenly, she noticed the unfamiliar Loki. "Who is this guy?" At that moment, Her radio crackled with Nick Fury's weak voice. "Hill, do you hear me? Hawkeye has turned traitor." As soon as Fury's words fell, Hawkeye decisively raised his gun and fired at her. Bang bang. Agent Hill quickly rolled to the side, taking cover behind a wall. Hawkeye and the others ignored her, got into the car, and drove away from S.H.I.E.L.D. Fury's voice continued over the radio. "They've taken the Tesseract. Stop them." Agent Hill quickly got into a car and gave chase. In the narrow underground tunnel, Loki and his team sped ahead, with several cars pursuing them from behind. Loki didn't hesitate to use his Mind Stone Scepter to send energy blasts at the pursuing cars. Without much resistance, they successfully escaped S.H.I.E.L.D., with the agents unable to stop them. Bright sunlight greeted them as they exited. As they drove away, they noticed a group of strange individuals in yellow robes standing by the roadside. "Master Caecilius, should we stop them?" Watching Loki and his group leave with the Tesseract, Peli couldn't help but ask Caecilius. "No need. Let them go. This is likely what our master wants to see." Caecilius thought for a moment and replied. Hawkeye, following Loki's order, stopped the car. Loki scanned the distant group of strange individuals with unique auras, frowning. With his superior hearing, he caught some of their conversation. "Who are you? Are you here to stop me?" Loki asked cautiously. While speaking, he pondered their conversation, having heard a term that intrigued him. Master? Which master? Loki felt it necessary to understand these people's identities. Hawkeye and the others in the car also looked towards the group. Among the dozen mages, Caecilius smiled and said, "As our master predicted, everything is about to begin." Master? Hawkeye and the others were puzzled. Which master? What did he foresee? While they were confused, Loki thought of something, his expression tightening and his gaze growing cold. Do these people know something? Their master's mention made Loki wary and cautious. Caecilius continued with a smile. "Don't worry, we won't hinder your departure. You should leave quickly, or you might not be able to soon." He glanced at the distant S.H.I.E.L.D. gate. Several cars and agents were running out, obviously preparing to intercept Loki. Loki took a deep look at them and said to Hawkeye, "Let's go." With that, Hawkeye hit the gas, speeding down the road. As they drove further, Loki, filled with suspicion, glanced back and was stunned. Seeing his expression, the still sane Dr. Selvig and the others turned to look as well. They saw the yellow-robed individuals creating a circular yellow portal and walking through it before S.H.I.E.L.D. agents could surround them. Dr. Selvig was astonished. "My God, where did they go?" he exclaimed. "Was that a portal? Amazing! Who are these people?" Dr. Selvig was shaken. What was happening recently? First, Asgardian gods appeared, and now these mystical individuals. His previous understanding of reality seemed shattered. Hawkeye and the others, sneaking glances while driving, also showed surprised expressions. Watching them disappear along with the portal, Dr. Selvig couldn't help but ask, "Who is their master? A god? Or who I think it is?" His mind raced with questions. Hawkeye and the others were equally puzzled and suspicious. Although their minds were controlled, it didn't prevent these emotions. They still acted normally except for their loyalty to Loki. Loki, recalling something, murmured, "Sorcerers of Midgard? But since when did they start calling anyone master?" If he remembered correctly, these Midgardian sorcerers had no such faith. Loki was perplexed. While they were confused, S.H.I.E.L.D. was making various arrangements after losing the Tesseract. Nick Fury, having treated his minor injury, contacted Black Widow Natasha Romanoff and Captain Steve Rogers. At Stark Tower, Tony Stark was working on some research data when Jarvis interrupted. "Sir, Agent Coulson from S.H.I.E.L.D. is calling." "Tell him I'm not here," Tony Stark said without looking up, grumbling, "He's always got something." Jarvis continued, "Sir, I don't think he'll believe that." End of chapter.